2 days before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, my mother-in-law showed up unannounced with a moving truck and hauled her boxes straight into my master bedroom. My fiancé not only helped her settle in, but he also expected me to sleep on the couch to accommodate her. The note I left them the next morning changed everything. My name is Allison. I am 33 years old, and I am the founder and lead director of a financial forensics firm. My daily job is to track down missing millions, expose corporate fraud, and send white-collar criminals to federal prison. I deal with master manipulators for a living. But somehow I had missed the two biggest parasites feeding right under my own roof. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set a firm boundary with toxic in-laws who thought they could walk all over you. It was a Friday evening in early October, exactly 48 hours before I was supposed to marry Brandon. Brandon was a 34-year-old regional sales director who always wore expensive suits, flashed a charismatic smile, and acted like he owned the world. I had purchased my 5-bedroom, $1.5 million home in the Chicago suburbs entirely in cash 2 years before I even met him. I worked 80-hour weeks building my firm from the ground up, tracing hidden assets and testifying in high-stakes court cases. I bought that house as a testament to my own hard work. I had just spent 12 exhausting hours auditing a corrupt pharmaceutical company. My brain was fried, my feet were aching, and all I wanted was a hot shower and a glass of expensive red wine. But as I turned onto my quiet tree-lined street, I slammed on my brakes. A massive rental moving truck was parked illegally half on my driveway and half on the pristine front lawn. I paid a landscaping company thousands of dollars a year to maintain. The back of the truck was wide open, and standing on the ramp was my fiancé Brandon, sweating through his designer polo shirt while carrying a heavy cardboard box. I parked my car on the street and walked slowly toward the house, my forensic mind already cataloging the details. The boxes were labeled with things like Brenda Summer Wardrobe and Brenda Kitchen Knickknacks. Brenda was Brandon's mother, a 62-year-old woman who treated every family gathering like her personal coronation and treated me like an overpaid servant. Brandon caught sight of me as I approached the porch. He froze for a fraction of a second, a flash of guilt crossing his features, before he plastered on his signature salesman smile. "Allison, babe, you are home early?" He chuckled nervously, shifting the heavy box in his arms. "Surprise. We are doing a little emergency moving." I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, my arms crossed. "What exactly is going on here, Brandon? Why is your mother's entire life packed into a truck on my lawn 2 days before our wedding?" He let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, playing the role of the stressed but dutiful son. "It is a disaster, babe. Mom's landlord is a total jerk. He just terminated her lease out of nowhere, completely blindsided her. She had to be out by noon today. I could not just leave her on the street, right? She is going to stay with us for a while until she gets back on her feet. You know how crazy the rental market is right now." My eyes narrowed. Brenda lived in a luxury high-rise downtown. Landlords do not just terminate a lease out of nowhere without months of prior warnings or severe lease violations. And even if they did, Brenda supposedly had plenty of money. She bragged constantly about her stock portfolio and her early retirement. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "She is upstairs getting settled in," Brandon said, rushing past me through the front door. "Come on, be nice to her. She is really fragile right now." I followed him into the house, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I bypassed the guest rooms on the first floor and walked up the sweeping staircase to the second level. As I approached the master suite, I heard a loud thud, followed by the sound of something dragging across the floor. I stepped into the doorway of my master bedroom and stopped dead in my tracks. Brenda was standing in the middle of my bedroom, surrounded by her unpacked boxes. But that was not what made my blood boil. Brenda had opened my custom walk-in closet and was systematically pulling out my expensive hard-earned leather work bags and tossing them carelessly into the hallway. My designer briefcases and totes bags I had bought to celebrate major milestones in my company were piled on the floor like discarded trash. "What do you think you are doing?" I demanded, stepping into the room. Brenda did not even flinch. She turned around, looking me up and down with an expression of mild annoyance. "Oh, good, you are home." She pointed a manicured finger toward the closet. "You have way too much space in here, Allison. I am moving my seasonal clothes into this section, so you need to clear out these shelves. And honestly, you should tell your housekeeper to dust the top racks. It is filthy up there." I stared at her, genuinely trying to process the sheer audacity of the moment. "You are throwing my belongings out of my closet in my house. It is our house now, Allison." Brenda corrected me smoothly, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. "Brandon lives here, and soon you will be married. Family shares. Besides, I am going through a terrible crisis. I need to be comfortable." Brandon hurried into the room, setting his box down near the foot of my bed. "Mom, maybe we should put your stuff in the guest room down the hall." "Absolutely not," Brenda snapped, placing her hands on her hips. "The guest bed is a queen." "You know I have a bad back, Brandon. I need a king-size mattress with proper lumbar support. My chiropractor specifically said so." She turned her gaze back to me, her eyes cold and calculating. "You and Brandon are young and resilient. You can take the guest room. Or better yet, you can sleep on the sectional sofa in the living room tonight. Brandon and I have been moving boxes all day, and he needs his rest for the wedding rehearsals tomorrow. You just sit at a desk all day anyway." I looked at Brandon, waiting for him to shut this insanity down. I waited for the man I was supposed to marry to tell his mother that she was out of her mind, that she could not commandeer the master bedroom of a house I bought with my own money, and that she certainly could not order me to sleep on the sofa. Instead, Brandon looked at the floor, rubbed the back of his neck, and offered me a pleading, pathetic look. "Come on, Allison," he mumbled. "Just for a little while. Mom has been crying all morning. Have a little heart, will you be flexible?" The silence that stretched through the master bedroom was heavy and suffocating. A lesser woman might have screamed. A different woman might have cried, thrown a tantrum, or started tossing Brenda's boxes out the window. But I was not a lesser woman. I was a financial forensic investigator. When someone presents me with a story that makes no logical sense, I do not get emotional. I look for the hidden ledger. I follow the money. I looked at my bags on the floor, then at Brenda's smug, entitled face, and finally at Brandon's cowardly posture. They thought they had trapped me. They thought the pressure of a wedding 48 hours away would force me into submission. They thought I would roll over to keep the peace. "Okay," I said quietly, my voice perfectly even. Brandon let out a massive sigh of relief. "Thank you, babe. I knew you would understand. You are the best." "Of course," I replied, offering a smile that did not reach my eyes. "Take the bed, Brenda. Make yourself completely at home. I will just grab my laptop and a few things. I have some late-night work to catch up on anyway." I picked up my tossed bags from the hallway, retrieved my computer from my briefcase, and walked downstairs to my home office. I locked the door behind me and sat down at my mahogany desk. I did not pull out a blanket for the sofa. I opened my specialized auditing software. Brandon had made a fatal error. In his rush to play the big-shot husband, he had previously given me access to his primary computer to help him file his taxes last year. He had no idea what kind of digital footprint he had left behind or what a woman with my skill set could do with it. I poured myself a glass of water, cracked my knuckles, and began to dig. By morning there would be no wedding. There would only be a spectacular, unmitigated destruction. Brandon did not just let me walk away quietly. He followed me down the sweeping wooden staircase, his leather shoes padding softly behind my heels. He knew I was furious, but his massive ego convinced him he could smooth talk his way out of anything. He was a regional sales director after all. His entire career was built on selling people things they did not need. Now he was trying to sell me the idea that being ousted from my own master bedroom was an act of profound familial love. "Allison, wait. Just stop for a second," he called out, catching my arm just as I reached the door of my home office. I turned around slowly, my eyes dropping to where his hand gripped my sleeve. He released me immediately, stepping back and raising his hands in a defensive gesture of surrender. "Do not walk away mad," he said, lowering his voice into that soft, placating tone he used whenever he wanted to win an argument. "We are getting married in 48 hours. This is supposed to be the happiest weekend of our lives. Do not let this ruin it. Mom is just under a lot of stress." I looked at him, studying the handsome face I had fallen in love with 2 years ago. I asked him a very simple, direct question. "Why did you not call me Brandon? Why did you not send a single text message telling me your mother was moving her entire life into my house?" His jaw tightened. The charming facade slipped, revealing the defensive, entitled man underneath. "It all happened so fast, Allison. I was busy renting the truck and packing her things. And honestly, I knew you would overreact exactly like you are doing right now. I am overreacting because a woman who openly disrespects me is currently sleeping in my bed," I stated, keeping my voice dangerously level. "It is our bed." Brandon snapped, his volume rising as his frustration peaked. "We are getting married. What is yours is mine. This is our house, Allison. We are supposed to be a partnership. We are a team. A team." The word echoed in the quiet hallway. I almost laughed out loud at the sheer delusion of his statement. I bought this multi-million-dollar estate entirely in cash before I even knew his last name. I paid the exorbitant property taxes, the premium homeowner's insurance, and the thousands of dollars required for landscaping and daily upkeep. My forensic accounting firm funded every single luxury in this house, from the imported Italian marble countertops to the custom security system. Brandon, on the other hand, contributed exactly $800 a month. That was his self-proclaimed share of the household expenses. He insisted on paying it to prove his masculinity, claiming it covered utilities and groceries. In reality, he consumed more than $800 a month in premium imported beers, organic steaks, and his expensive sports streaming subscriptions. His financial contribution was a microscopic rounding error in my budget. Yet here he was standing in my foyer, boldly claiming ownership of a fortress I built with my own blood, sweat, and intelligence. "I contribute to this household." Brandon continued, puffing out his chest as if reading my mind. "I pay $800 every single month without fail. I am not some freeloader, Allison. I am the man of this house. You are acting like a cold-blooded accountant right now. Do not look at my mother like she is some negative line item on a spreadsheet. She is a human being who just lost her home. She is going to be your family. Have some sympathy for once in your life." He threw the words at me like weapons, expecting them to hit their mark. He expected me to crumble. He expected me to feel guilty for being successful, for being logical, for being protective of my own sanctuary. This was his signature gaslighting maneuver. Whenever he crossed a boundary, he immediately flipped the script, making me the villain for daring to notice the boundary had been crossed at all. He wanted me to believe that demanding basic respect made me a heartless, calculating machine. When people try to use guilt as a weapon, they are usually hiding something much darker. In my line of work, I have interrogated corporate executives who tried this exact same tactic. When I catch them embezzling millions, they do not confess right away. Instead, they get angry, they deflect. They tell me I do not understand the pressure they are under, or they accuse me of lacking human empathy. Brandon was using the exact same playbook. He was trying to make me feel terrible about protecting my own property so that I would not look too closely at the real reason his mother had suddenly been evicted. Landlords do not kick out wealthy retirees on a Friday morning for absolutely no reason. There was a missing piece to this puzzle, and Brandon was shouting loudly to distract me from finding it. I stood perfectly still, letting his angry words hang in the heavy air between us. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not list my massive financial contributions or remind him that his $800 barely covered the electricity bill during the freezing Chicago winters. Arguing with a parasite is a complete waste of energy. You do not negotiate with a tick, you simply extract it. Instead of fighting back, I looked at his flushed, angry face and did the exact opposite of what he expected. I smiled. It was a slow, chilling smile that did not reach my eyes. "You are absolutely right, Brandon," I said softly, my voice dripping with an eerie calm. "We are getting married in 2 days. Family shares everything. We are a team. I should be more accommodating to your mother during her time of need." Brandon blinked, completely thrown off guard by my sudden compliance. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a triumphant, arrogant smirk. He actually believed he had won. He believed his pathetic emotional manipulation had broken my resolve. "Exactly, babe." He breathed out a huge sigh of relief, stepping forward to pull me into a hug. I easily sidestepped his embrace, clutching my laptop tightly against my chest. "I will sleep on the sofa downstairs," I told him smoothly. "You go back upstairs and get some rest. Like you said, tomorrow is a big day. We have the rehearsal dinner and you need to be fresh." He beamed at me, completely oblivious to the danger lurking behind my agreeable tone. "Thank you, Allison. I promise this is just temporary. You are going to make a beautiful bride." "Good night, Brandon," I said. I watched him turn around and jog happily back up the stairs, eager to return to the master suite he had so graciously gifted to his mother. He thought he had secured his luxurious future. He thought he had successfully subdued the rich, independent woman into a compliant, silent wife. The moment he disappeared from view, my smile vanished entirely. The icy resolve returned to my veins. I turned the brass handle of my office door, stepped inside the dark room and locked the heavy oak door firmly behind me. I did not walk over to the sofa. I walked straight to my massive desk, opened my laptop, and watched the screen illuminate the dark room. If Brandon wanted to call me a cold-blooded accountant, I was more than happy to play the part. It was time to audit my fiancé. The heavy oak door of my office clicked shut, sealing me inside my command center. The room was soundproof, a feature I insisted on when I bought the estate, ensuring absolute silence for my complex investigations. I did not bother turning on the overhead lights. The glow from my triple monitor setup illuminated the space in a cold blue hue. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, cracked my knuckles, and woke up the servers. Brandon thought I was a cold-blooded accountant. He was about to find out just how accurate that assessment was. My firm utilized proprietary forensic auditing software, the kind that interfaces directly with federal databases, public record archives, and global banking registries. To the average person, hiding money or covering up a financial disaster might seem easy. To me, a digital paper trail was as visible as glowing neon footprints in fresh snow. Last spring, Brandon had handed over his laptop and a folder of his financial documents, begging me to file his taxes because he claimed the software confused him. That single act of laziness gave me everything I needed. I had his routing numbers, his primary bank account details, and a baseline of his financial habits. I opened a new encrypted file on my desktop and typed in his name, followed by his mother's name. I decided to start with Brenda. Brandon had spun a sob story about a ruthless landlord suddenly terminating her lease. That narrative felt incredibly flimsy. In Illinois, tenant rights are robust. Landlords cannot simply toss a senior citizen onto the street with zero notice unless there is severe documented legal cause. I tapped into the Cook County public property records and ran a search for Brenda's supposedly rented downtown high-rise. The results populated instantly, and I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Brenda did not rent that condominium. She had owned it. Or rather, she had owned it until the bank seized it. I pulled up the court dockets and sifted through the foreclosure filings. Brenda had not paid her mortgage in over 14 months. The bank had issued multiple notices, granted grace periods, and finally initiated a formal eviction protocol. Yesterday morning was not a sudden tragedy. It was the scheduled, legally mandated lockout date executed by the county sheriff. But where had all her money gone? Brenda constantly boasted about her early retirement and her lucrative stock portfolio. I dug deeper, accessing civil court records and lien registries. The truth was not glamorous. There was no diverse stock portfolio. There were only massive crippling debts. The records showed multiple liens filed by collection agencies and, more interestingly, by a prominent casino resort corporation based across the state line. Brenda was not a victim of a cruel landlord. She was a severe gambling addict who had quite literally bet her entire home away at the blackjack tables and slot machines. I sat back in my chair, the blue light washing over my face. So Brandon knew his mother was being evicted by the sheriff, yet he orchestrated this entire circus to make her look like a victim, manipulating me into letting a chronic gambler infiltrate my home. But a nagging question gnawed at the back of my mind. Brandon made a decent salary as a regional sales director. Why had he not simply paid off her mortgage arrears to save her condo? I toggled over to Brandon's financial profile, running a quiet trace on his primary checking account. His balance was shockingly low. He was living paycheck to paycheck, spending entirely on luxury car leases, expensive watches, and custom suits to maintain his wealthy facade. He had absolutely no liquid savings to bail out his mother. My heart rate remained steady, but a cold knot formed in my stomach. If Brandon had no money, how was he financing this sudden emergency move? Moving trucks, storage units, and paying off Brenda's immediate creditors required fast cash. A terrifying suspicion crept into my mind. I opened my personal secure portal and initiated a comprehensive hard pull on my own credit report from Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I am meticulous about my finances, usually checking my reports quarterly. With the wedding planning consuming my recent schedule, I had not looked in 2 months. The report generated on my center screen. I stared at the numbers, my breathing stopping completely. There were 2 new accounts listed under my name, 2 platinum-tier credit cards with $50,000 limits each. Both accounts had been opened exactly 6 weeks ago. Both cards were currently maxed out. I clicked on the account details, my eyes scanning the billing information. The address linked to the cards was a private post office box, registered in Brandon's name, but the social security number used to approve the massive credit lines was mine. Brandon had stolen my social security number. The man I was scheduled to marry in less than 48 hours had committed federal identity theft against me. I bypassed the credit bureaus and used my forensic access to pull the transaction histories for both fraudulent cards. The statements were a roadmap of desperation and betrayal. He had used my credit to pay off $30,000 of Brenda's immediate casino markers, preventing a separate lawsuit. He had charged the moving truck to my name. He had even bought her a new designer wardrobe to replace the items she had to leave behind during the foreclosure. He was funding his hero complex and his mother's gambling addiction using my pristine credit score. For a long moment, the only sound in the office was the gentle hum of my computer's cooling fans. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel the urge to scream or throw things. In my profession, discovering fraud does not provoke hysteria. It provokes a predatory, icy focus. Brandon thought he was clever. He thought because we were engaged, he could blur the lines of our finances and ask for forgiveness later. He assumed that once the marriage certificate was signed on Sunday, our assets would legally merge, burying his massive theft under the umbrella of marital debt. He was banking on my commitment to the wedding to shield him from the law. He had miscalculated catastrophically. I did not just have boundary issues with my future mother-in-law. I was living with a felon. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I began downloading every single document, every transaction timestamp, and every IP address log that proved he executed the applications from his personal device. I compiled the foreclosure notices, the casino liens, and the credit card statements into a master dossier. I encrypted the file and mirrored it to 3 separate secure cloud servers. I looked at the digital clock in the corner of my screen. It was 1 a.m. The wedding rehearsal was scheduled for tomorrow evening. I closed the forensic software, the evidence securely locked away in my digital vault. I leaned back and stared at the dark ceiling of my office. Brandon and Brenda were sleeping soundly upstairs in my master bedroom, entirely confident that they had won. They thought they had secured a lifetime of luxury financed by the quiet, accommodating woman sleeping downstairs. They were about to learn that you never ever steal from a woman who destroys financial criminals for a living. The blue light of my monitors cast long shadows across the walls of my soundproof office. The digital clock in the bottom right corner of my screen flipped to exactly 2 in the morning. I was still sitting there staring at the irrefutable proof of Brandon committing felony identity theft, when the silence was shattered by a sharp, sudden vibration. My private cell phone, a number I only gave to high-level clients and immediate family, was buzzing on the mahogany desk. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Terrence. Terrence was Brandon's brother-in-law, married to Brandon's younger sister Vanessa. He was a brilliant certified public accountant, a hard-working African-American man who always seemed entirely too decent to be associated with that family. At family dinners, Terrence and I usually gravitated toward each other, finding quiet corners to discuss tax law and market trends, while Brandon and Vanessa loudly dominated the room. We were the outsiders. We were the ones who actually worked for a living. Calling at 2 in the morning was completely out of character for him. I picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear. "Terrence," I said, keeping my voice low. "Is everything all right, Allison? Listen to me very carefully." His voice came through the speaker as a harsh, urgent whisper. "Are you in a secure room? Can anyone hear you?" "I am locked in my home office," I replied, my forensic instincts instantly kicking into high gear. "Brandon and his mother are asleep upstairs." "What is going on?" "Check your secure encrypted email portal," Terrence said, his breathing shallow and rapid. "I just sent a data packet to the address we used when we consulted on that corporate merger last year. You need to open it right now." I did not ask questions. I pulled up the encrypted portal, bypassed the two-factor authentication, and saw a newly deposited file. I downloaded it, unzipped the contents, and opened the first PDF document. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. It was a prenuptial agreement, but it was drastically altered. It was not the standard mutual protection document Brandon and I had briefly discussed and dismissed months ago. This was a predatory unilateral contract designed to strip me of everything. "What am I looking at, Terrence?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "That is a modified post-nuptial transfer agreement," Terrence whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and exhaustion. "Brandon and Vanessa paid a shady paralegal to draft it last week. They disguised the title page to look like standard liability insurance waivers for the wedding venue." I scrolled down to the execution clauses. The document explicitly stated that upon signing, I would irrevocably transfer 50% ownership of my financial forensics firm and 50% equity of my residential estate directly to Brandon. It bypassed all standard legal waiting periods. "How did they plan to get my signature on this without me reading it?" I demanded. "That is the sickest part," Terrence replied. "Vanessa has been coordinating with the bartender for your wedding reception. They planned to feed you heavily spiked drinks all night. They were going to wait until you were blackout drunk, bring you back to the bridal suite, and tell you that the venue manager needed emergency signatures for a noise ordinance waiver. They were going to hold your hand and guide the pen if they had to." A wave of pure disgust washed over me. They were not just thieves, they were predators. They viewed my life, my business, and my home as a hostile takeover target, and they were willing to drug me to execute the merger. "How did you find this?" I asked. "Vanessa got careless," Terrence said, the heartbreak evident in his quiet tone. "She left her laptop open on the kitchen island tonight. I saw an email thread between her and Brandon. They were celebrating. They were bragging about how they finally secured the bag. But Allison, that is not all I found." I heard the sound of a door clicking shut on his end of the line, followed by a heavy, defeated sigh. "I started digging into our own joint accounts," Terrence continued. "I am a CPA, Allison. I should have seen it. I should have noticed. But she is my wife and I trusted her. Vanessa used my credentials to open 3 secret lines of credit over the past year. She dumped $50,000 of debt directly onto my name." My heart ached for him. We were mirroring each other in our respective tragedies. Both of us were highly educated financial professionals blinded by love and systematically financially abused by the people we shared our beds with. Where did the money go? I asked, though I already knew the answer. To Brenda, Terrence confirmed bitterly. Brenda has a massive gambling addiction. She lost her condo. Brandon and Vanessa have been scrambling to cover her tracks, siphoning money from you and me to keep her out of jail and keep up their wealthy family facade. We are nothing but piggy banks to them, Allison. We are the cash cows they brought in to slaughter. I stared at the fraudulent contract on my screen. The anger that had been simmering inside me solidified into a hardened, unbreakable weapon. They had messed with the wrong woman, and they had messed with the wrong man. Terrence, I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. Are you ready to burn their entire house of cards to the ground? I am done, Allison. I am so completely done, he replied. The exhaustion in his voice replaced by a sudden fierce resolve. I have downloaded every bank statement, every forged application, every email thread. I have it all on a physical hard drive. I am packing a bag right now. I am leaving Vanessa before the sun comes up. Good, I instructed. Take your vital documents. Empty your half of any legitimate joint funds. Do not confront her. Do not give her a chance to manipulate you or destroy the evidence. You get in your car and you drive to a hotel. What are you going to do? Terrence asked. I am going to do what I do best, I stated, saving the fraudulent contract into my master evidence dossier. I am going to initiate a catastrophic audit. Tomorrow is supposed to be my wedding rehearsal. By noon, Brandon and Brenda will be wishing they had never learned how to spell my name. I will call Harrison as soon as the sun rises. We will need airtight legal representation to execute this. Harrison was my corporate attorney, a ruthless, brilliant legal mind who specialized in financial fraud and asset recovery. He would have an absolute field day with this material. Thank you, Terrence, I added softly. You saved my life tonight. You saved my company. We save each other, Allison. Terrence replied firmly. We are the only real family either of us has left in this mess. Give them hell tomorrow. I ended the call and set the phone down on the mahogany desk. The clock read 2:30 in the morning. I had been betrayed, robbed, and targeted for a massive financial scam by the man I was supposed to marry. My future mother-in-law was sleeping in my bed, dreaming of the empire she thought she had conquered. I did not feel heartbroken anymore. I felt powerful. I cracked my knuckles one more time, opened a blank document, and began to draft the note I would leave on the kitchen island. It was time to set the trap. I checked the time on my monitors. It was 2:45 in the morning. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had never used outside of standard business hours. Harrison did not answer on the first ring. He was 55 years old, a veteran of Chicago's most vicious corporate litigation battles, and he valued his sleep above almost anything else. But he also knew that if I called him at this hour, a financial disaster of epic proportions was currently unfolding and required immediate, ruthless intervention. He picked up on the fourth ring. His voice was gravelly, but entirely alert. Allison, tell me someone is going to federal prison. Someone is going to federal prison. Harrison, I replied, keeping my voice a low, steady whisper. Actually make that a family reunion in federal prison. I need you at your computer right now. We are executing an emergency asset lockdown and a hostile corporate eviction, and we have exactly 9 hours before the police need to arrive at my front door. I heard the rustle of heavy sheets and the thud of his footsteps hitting the floor. Give me 30 seconds, he said. Talk to me while I boot up the secure servers. What exactly did the groom-to-be do to warrant a midnight call? I outlined everything with surgical precision. I told him about Brenda occupying my master bedroom to hide her gambling foreclosure. I told him about the 2 maxed-out platinum credit cards opened with my stolen social security number. And finally, I told him about the fraudulent post-nuptial agreement Terrence had intercepted detailing the plot to drug me at my own wedding reception, to steal half of my company and my real estate. For a long moment, The only sound on the line was the rapid clicking of Harrison typing on his mechanical keyboard. When he finally spoke, his tone was completely devoid of its usual sarcastic edge. It was pure, unfiltered legal malice. They tried to steal from a forensic auditor and a corporate attack dog, Harrison said, letting out a sharp breath of disbelief. The absolute sheer arrogance of these people is staggering. All right, Allison, we are going to burn them to the absolute ground. Where do we start? First, we freeze the credit. I instructed, my fingers mirroring his rapid typing across my own triple monitor setup. I am logging into the direct portal for the major bureaus. I am placing a hard permanent lock on my social security number. No new accounts, no inquiries, no modifications of any kind. Done, Harrison confirmed. I am pulling the fraud dispute forms for the 2 active cards Brandon opened. We will file them under federal identity theft protocols right now. This triggers an automatic investigation by the fraud division. By the time Brandon tries to buy his morning coffee, those cards will be dead plastic and his private post office box will be flagged by federal authorities. Next is my company. I continued opening my firm's administrative dashboard. Brandon had zero access to my professional accounts, but I was taking zero chances. I rotated every master password, forced a global logout on all devices, and instituted a strict biometric lock on the company's central ledger. I then logged into my personal banking portal. I stripped Brandon of his status as an authorized user on our minor joint account, sweeping the balance to cover exactly what he originally contributed, leaving him with $800. The rest of my millions were locked behind impenetrable multi-tiered encryption protocols. You need to secure the physical assets immediately, Harrison advised, his voice sharp through the speaker. Brandon and his mother are currently inside your property. If they wake up and realize they are trapped, they might resort to destroying your home out of spite. I am already one step ahead of you, I replied, pulling up the digital deed to my estate. We are executing a rapid transfer. I had spent the last 3 months setting up a corporate shell entity named Titan Property Management. It was supposed to be a holding company for a commercial real estate acquisition I was planning for the next fiscal quarter. Tonight it would serve a much more aggressive and satisfying purpose. Harrison, I am transferring the deed of my house from my personal name directly into the Titan Holding Company. I need you to push the digital notarization through the county clerk portal right now. You have the emergency judicial contacts. Wake up whoever you need to wake up and get this stamped. Harrison chuckled, a dark, rich sound that echoed through the phone. Transferring ownership to a corporate entity changes the entire legal landscape of their occupancy. If the house belongs to you personally, Brandon can argue he is a domestic partner with established residency rights. Evicting him would require a 30-day notice and a messy civil court battle. Exactly, I said, confirming the legal trap we were setting. But if the house is owned by Titan Property Management, a faceless corporate entity, Brandon and Brenda are no longer problematic house guests. They are unauthorized squatters occupying a commercial asset. Corporate evictions do not require a 30-day notice in this jurisdiction. They require a call to the local sheriff for immediate removal of hostile trespassers. I am sending the transfer documents to the county clerk's emergency queue right now. Harrison said, the typing on his end growing faster. The digital stamp will be verified by sunrise. Titan Property Management officially owns the estate. Now how do we handle the eviction execution? Draft a formal notice of immediate termination of residency, I instructed. Print it on your heaviest legal letterhead. Send a courier to deliver it directly to the local sheriff's department by 8 in the morning. Request a police escort to enforce a noon eviction. Tell the sheriff the corporate owner feels threatened by the hostile occupants currently refusing to leave the premises. Consider it done, Harrison said. What is your next move? I am setting a trap, I said, reaching into my desk drawer. I pulled out a sleek silver USB flash drive. I knew Brandon's greedy habits perfectly. Once the eviction notice hit and the credit cards declined, he would panic. He would scramble to find leverage against me. He would try to breach my home office, desperate to find financial records, client lists, or anything he could hold hostage to force a negotiation and save his own skin. I plugged the silver USB into a quarantined virtual machine on my computer. I quickly compiled a folder labeled Confidential Prenup Draft and Client Financials. But the files inside were not documents at all. They were an extremely aggressive military-grade ransomware payload I kept securely isolated for studying corporate cyber attacks. If Brandon took this drive and plugged it into any computer, the ransomware would immediately deploy, locking the entire operating system and encrypting every connected server within seconds. I placed the silver drive right in the center of my desk, a shiny, irresistible piece of bait for a greedy, desperate rat. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky outside my office window in shades of pale gray and bruised purple. My work here was done. The financial fortress was sealed. The legal weapons were loaded, primed, and aimed directly at the people sleeping upstairs. I closed my laptop and packed it securely into my leather briefcase. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my clothes. I felt no exhaustion, only a sharp, crystalline energy pulsing through my veins. I unlocked the heavy oak door of my office and walked quietly down the hallway toward the kitchen. The house was perfectly still. I stood at the massive marble kitchen island, the exact spot where I had cooked dinners for a man who was actively plotting my absolute ruin. I pulled a piece of thick, cream-colored stationery from the drawer and grabbed a black ink pen. A screaming match would give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Silence combined with total financial annihilation was much more my style. I kept my handwriting fluid and elegant, crafting a message so dripping with false sweetness, it was practically venomous. Good morning, Brandon. I realized last night that you and your mother truly need this house more than I do. I want you both to be completely comfortable. Please take the master bedroom. Make yourselves entirely at home. Everything inside the master wall safe is my early wedding gift to you and Brenda. Enjoy your new life together. I am heading to the spa to get ready for our big weekend. Love, Allison. I folded the note neatly in half and placed it precisely in the center of the kitchen island, right next to the coffee maker where Brandon would find it the moment he woke up. Inside the master wall safe upstairs, I had placed the final pieces of the puzzle. I left a copy of the canceled wedding venue contract, the severed credit card statements highlighting his felony fraud, and the official corporate eviction notice from Titan Property Management. I picked up my briefcase, walked out the front door, and locked it securely behind me. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and drove away from the estate without looking back. Let them wake up and celebrate their fake victory. By noon, the police sirens would provide the perfect soundtrack to their spectacular destruction. I sat in the plush leather chair of a private suite at a downtown luxury spa, a freshly brewed espresso in my hand. My tablet was propped up on the glass table in front of me, streaming crystal-clear high-definition footage from the hidden security cameras I had installed throughout my estate months ago. As a forensic auditor, I never trusted anyone completely. Trust is a liability. Surveillance is an asset. At exactly 9 in the morning, the kitchen camera feed showed Brandon sauntering in. He was wearing his expensive silk robe, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He looked incredibly pleased with himself. He walked over to the espresso machine and immediately spotted the cream-colored stationery sitting on the marble island. I watched his eyes scan the words I had written. His arrogant smirk widened into a full-blown, triumphant grin. He actually pumped his fist in the air. He thought he had won. He thought my strategic retreat was a total surrender. In his narcissistic mind, my departure to the spa was the ultimate submission of a wealthy, obedient wife who had finally learned her place in his fabricated hierarchy. He grabbed the note and practically sprinted up the stairs. I switched my tablet to the master bedroom feed. Brenda was lounging against my custom-upholstered headboard, wearing one of my silk sleeping masks pushed up on her forehead. She was holding a cup of tea, looking around my bedroom, as if deciding which walls she wanted to repaint first. Brandon burst through the door, waving the note like a winning lottery ticket. "Mom, look at this," he said, his voice booming through the audio feed. I told you she would cave. I told you I had her wrapped around my finger. She left for the spa to get ready for the wedding. She said we can have the master bedroom permanently. Brenda took the note from his hands, her eyes darting across my elegant handwriting. A wicked, satisfied laugh erupted from her throat. I knew it, she crowed, tossing the note onto my nightstand. These career women always talk a big game, but at the end of the day, they are desperate to keep a handsome man. She knows her biological clock is ticking, Brandon. She knows she needs you more than you need her. We are going to be living in luxury, honey. We just secured our retirement plan. Brandon pointed eagerly at the bottom of the paper. Read the last part, Mom. She left us an early wedding gift inside the wall safe. She is practically handing over the keys to the kingdom to apologize for being such a nightmare last night. Brenda scrambled out of bed with a speed I did not know she possessed. She rushed over to the discreet paneling behind my closet door where the wall safe was hidden. Open it, she demanded, tapping Brandon on the shoulder. Hurry up! She probably left us a stack of cash or the bearer bonds she always brags about auditing. Maybe she finally put your name on the property deed. Brandon approached the keypad. He punched in the 6-digit code. He thought he was being clever when he peeked over my shoulder 2 months ago to memorize it. I had let him see it on purpose, knowing a rat will always return to the cheese. The heavy steel door beeped and swung open with a soft mechanical click. I zoomed in on the camera feed, taking another slow sip of my espresso. The payoff was about to be exquisite. Brandon reached inside the dark cavity of the safe. There were no stacks of $100 bills. There were no velvet jewelry boxes. There was only a single thick manila envelope. He pulled it out, his brow furrowing in confusion. He ripped the top open and dumped the contents onto the pristine white duvet of my bed. Brenda leaned in closely, her greedy eyes widening, expecting financial salvation. Instead, she was met with a stack of heavily stamped legal documents. Brandon picked up the first paper. It was printed on the official letterhead of our exclusive wedding venue. His eyes scanned the bold black text, and the smug color instantly drained from his face. What is it? Brenda demanded, snatching the paper from his trembling hand. It is a cancellation notice, Brandon whispered, his voice suddenly sounding very small and very hollow. She canceled the venue. She canceled the caterer. She canceled the entire wedding. There is a $0 refund attached. Brenda stared at the document, her mouth falling open. That is impossible. The rehearsal is tonight. She cannot just cancel a $100,000 wedding. Brandon did not respond. He was already picking up the second stack of papers. These were the statements for the 2 platinum credit cards he had fraudulently opened under my social security number. Across the top of every single page, Harrison had stamped a massive red warning label. Federal identity theft reported. Accounts frozen. Investigation pending. Brandon dropped the papers as if they had physically burned him. He stumbled backward, his back hitting the closet door. He began patting his pockets frantically, pulling out his cell phone to check his banking app. I watched the exact second his screen loaded. I watched his eyes lock onto the miserable $800 balance. He realized he had absolutely nothing. The unlimited well of my money had run completely dry. Brenda was flipping through the remaining pages on the bed, her hands shaking violently. She found the final document. It was the formal, notarized corporate eviction notice. Brandon, what is Titan Property Management? Brenda shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical octave. Why does this paper say Titan Property Management owns this house? Brandon stared at her, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. What are you talking about? Allison owns this house. Not anymore, Brenda yelled, shoving the legal notice into his chest. It says the property was transferred. It says your residency is officially terminated. Brandon read the bottom line. Brandon grabbed the paper, his eyes darting frantically across Harrison's ruthless legal phrasing. He read the final sentence aloud, his voice cracking with absolute terror. Hostile trespassers must vacate the commercial premises immediately. Local law enforcement has been dispatched to execute a forced removal at exactly 11:59 this morning. Any belongings remaining inside the property after 12 noon will be considered abandoned and disposed of accordingly. Brandon looked up at the wall clock. It was 10:30. They had less than 90 minutes before the sheriff arrived with a battering ram. She knew. Brandon gasped, clutching his chest, as a full-blown panic attack set in. She knew about the credit cards. She knew about your gambling debts. She set us up. We are completely broke, Mom. We have no money. We have no house. The feds are going to arrest me for identity theft. Brenda collapsed onto the edge of the bed, her hands pulling at her hair. This cannot be happening. Call her. Call her right now and fix this. Beg her. Tell her you will do whatever she wants. Brandon frantically dialed my number on his cell phone. I watched him pace the bedroom, pressing the phone to his ear, his face contorted in sheer desperation. On my end, my private phone sat silently on the glass table. I had routed his number directly to a disconnected tone. I watched him pull the phone away from his ear, staring at the screen in absolute horror as the automated voice informed him that the number he was trying to reach was no longer in service. The delusion of their luxurious morning had completely shattered. They were trapped in a fortress that had suddenly turned into a cage, and the clock was ticking mercilessly toward noon. I took one final satisfying sip of my espresso and closed the camera application. It was time for the police to take over. I settled into the heated massage chair at the spa, wrapped in a plush robe, and reopened the security application on my tablet. I had told myself I would stop watching, but missing the grand finale of the trap I had so meticulously set was simply out of the question. The digital clock in the corner of my screen ticked relentlessly toward noon. It was exactly 24 hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. Instead of putting on a white dress, I was about to watch my ex-fiancé wear a pair of silver handcuffs. Inside my house, absolute chaos had taken over. The camera feeds showed Brandon tearing through the downstairs rooms, his phone glued to his ear. He was frantically calling any defense attorney he could find on Google. I watched him pace the living room, running his hands through his hair, shouting into the receiver. I did not need audio to know that every law firm in Chicago was demanding a massive upfront retainer money he absolutely did not possess. His $800 bank balance could not even buy him a consultation. Upstairs, Brenda was in full meltdown mode. She was shoving her cheap porcelain figurines and gaudy summer dresses back into the cardboard boxes she had so proudly unpacked just hours ago. She was weeping, her face red and blotchy, realizing that her luxurious retirement plan had evaporated into thin air. At precisely 12 o'clock, a fleet of vehicles pulled up to my driveway. Through the exterior camera, I watched two marked police cruisers and a large unmarked cargo van park aggressively along the curb. 4 uniformed deputies stepped out, led by a seasoned county sheriff holding a thick clipboard. The heavy, authoritative pounding on my custom mahogany front door echoed through the audio feed. It was not a polite knock. It was the undeniable sound of law enforcement executing a corporate directive. Brandon froze in the living room. He stared at the front door as if it were a live explosive. He took a deep breath, adjusted the collar of his designer shirt, and marched toward the entryway. He opened the door, plastering on the same charming, slick salesman smile he used to manipulate clients. "Officers, is there a problem?" Brandon asked, his voice dripping with forced confidence. "I am the homeowner's fiancé. We are just dealing with a minor misunderstanding today." The sheriff did not smile back. He did not offer a polite greeting. He looked at Brandon with the cold, detached professionalism of a man who dealt with hostile evictions every single day. "Are you Brandon the sheriff?" asked, his voice sharp and carrying clearly over the microphone. "Yes, sir. I am," Brandon replied, puffing out his chest slightly. "Like I said, my fiancé and I are getting married tomorrow. Whatever paperwork you have is just a clerical error." The sheriff held up the clipboard, displaying the thick stack of legal documents Harrison had expedited through the county courts. "There is no clerical error. This property is exclusively owned by Titan Property Management. Titan Property Management holds no residential leases. You are currently occupying a commercial asset without authorization. You have been served with a notice of immediate termination. Step outside the residence right now." Brandon's fake smile completely collapsed. His face drained of all color as the reality of corporate law crushed his pathetic defense. "Officer, you do not understand?" he stammered, stepping back into the foyer. "My fiancée is playing a game. She is just angry. You cannot kick us out. We live here. You are trespassing on private corporate property." The sheriff repeated his tone, leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. "Step outside immediately, or you will be removed by force." Suddenly, the frantic sound of footsteps echoed down the staircase. Brenda stormed into the foyer, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated entitlement. She pointed a trembling finger at the sheriff. "You cannot do this to us!" she screeched, her voice shrill and piercing. "My son is going to own this house tomorrow. We are moving in. You have no right to come here and threaten my family. I am a senior citizen." "Ma'am," the sheriff said, stepping across the threshold of the front door, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. "I am telling you one last time. Vacate the premises." "I am not going anywhere," Brenda screamed, planting her feet firmly on the hardwood floor and crossing her arms. "This is my house now." That was the exact moment the deputies moved in. They did not argue. They did not negotiate with her delusion. Two officers stepped past Brandon, grabbing Brenda by the arms. She shrieked, thrashing wildly, trying to rip her arms away from their grip. She kicked at the officers, her sheer entitlement blinding her to the severe legal consequences of assaulting law enforcement. Within seconds, a sharp metallic click echoed through the foyer. They pinned Brenda's arms behind her back and locked a pair of heavy steel handcuffs around her wrists. "Get your hands off my mother!" Brandon yelled, lunging forward to intervene. It was the stupidest mistake he could have possibly made. The remaining two deputies immediately grabbed Brandon, shoving him hard against the wall of the entryway. He grunted in pain as they twisted his arms behind his back. Another metallic click rang out. The slick, arrogant regional sales director was now fully restrained, his face pressed against the expensive floral wallpaper he had never paid a single cent for. I watched through the screen as the deputies marched them out of the front door and down the porch steps. I switched to the exterior camera feed to catch the full spectacle. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers had drawn an audience. My neighborhood was filled with affluent, highly observant residents. Neighbors were standing on their manicured lawns, holding their leashed golden retrievers and sipping their morning coffees, watching with wide eyes as Brandon and Brenda were dragged down the driveway like common criminals. The humiliation was absolute and entirely public. Brandon was hanging his head in deep shame, desperately trying to hide his face from the watching crowd. Brenda, however, was still screaming, cursing my name to anyone who would listen, completely destroying whatever shred of dignity she had left. But the poetry of my revenge was not quite finished. The unmarked cargo van that had arrived with the police suddenly opened its back doors. A crew of 6 burly men in matching work uniforms stepped out. This was the rapid cleanout crew Harrison had hired on behalf of Titan Property Management. The sheriff gave them a swift nod. The crew marched straight into my house and headed directly up the stairs to the master bedroom. I watched in pure, unadulterated satisfaction as the crew began hauling Brenda's cardboard boxes out the front door. They did not handle them with care. They did not neatly stack them. Following the strict legal definition of abandoning property during a hostile corporate eviction, the crew marched the boxes to the very edge of the property line and unceremoniously dumped them onto the street curb. Then came Brandon's belongings: his expensive designer suits, his golf clubs, his collection of imported watches. The crew hauled his items out and tossed them directly onto the pavement right next to his mother's cheap porcelain figurines. It was the exact perfect mirror of what Brenda had done to my hard-earned designer bags just 12 hours earlier. Only this time her items were not sitting in a climate-controlled hallway. They were piled like trash on the public sidewalk for the entire neighborhood to see. The deputies secured Brandon and Brenda in the back of the police cruisers. Through the camera, I saw Brandon staring out the barred window of the police car, looking at his entire life scattered across the concrete. The realization of his absolute ruin was permanently etched onto his face. The cruisers pulled away, the sirens wailing as they drove my ex-fiancé and his mother straight to the county jail. The cleanout crew locked my front door, handed the keys to the sheriff, and drove away, leaving nothing but a pile of garbage on the curb. I locked the screen of my tablet, took a deep breath, and leaned back into the massage chair. My house was clean. My assets were secure. The parasites had been successfully extracted. I closed my eyes and smiled. It was turning out to be a truly beautiful weekend. By late afternoon, the county jail had processed and released Brandon and Brenda. I knew this because I had set up automated alerts for their booking numbers through the county inmate registry. Vanessa, the ever-dutiful daughter and sister, had driven down to post their bail. I assumed they would retreat to some cheap motel to lick their wounds and figure out how to survive without my bank accounts. I should have known that parasites do not retreat quietly. When you cut off their food supply, they bite back. I was sitting in my newly secured home office the next morning, sipping a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, when my customized media monitoring software began to chime. In my line of work, reputation is everything. A financial forensic auditor is only as valuable as her integrity. Corporations hire me to find missing millions because my ethical standing is bulletproof. I had algorithms constantly scanning the internet for any mention of my name, my firm, or my corporate shell entities. Suddenly, the dashboard lit up with dozens of red alerts. They were pouring in from Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. I clicked on the primary source link. It was a public post from Vanessa's account, and it was already going viral within our extended social circles and local Chicago community groups. Brandon had clearly helped her craft it, aiming directly for maximum emotional manipulation and professional destruction. The post featured a highly edited, tearful video of Brenda sitting on a motel bed, looking disheveled and frail. Above the video was a massive block of text. "Let the world know the truth about Allison," the post began. "She is a clinical psychopath who preys on loving families. For 2 years she manipulated my brother Brandon, draining our family finances to fund her sham accounting business. Yesterday, on the eve of their wedding, she illegally threw my elderly mother onto the street and stole every dime we had." I scoffed at the sheer projection. They were literally accusing me of the exact crimes they had committed. But the post did not stop there. It took a much darker, incredibly vile turn. The reason she canceled the wedding, Vanessa had written, adding red alarm emojis to the text. "Because she has been carrying on a disgusting secret affair with my husband Terrence. Allison and Terrence have been conspiring behind our backs for months. He abandoned his own child yesterday to run off with this rich, manipulative woman. We welcomed Terrence into our home, and he repaid us by teaming up with this fraud to destroy us." I read the words again, my blood running ice cold. The racist undertones were not even subtly disguised. They were deliberately painting Terrence, a hard-working, brilliant African-American man, as the treacherous, untrustworthy outsider who had infiltrated their pure, innocent family to steal their wealth. They framed him as a predator who had easily been bought by a wealthy, psychotic woman. It was a disgusting, calculated smear designed to trigger outrage and ruin both of our lives. But Brandon was not just aiming for social media sympathy. He was actively trying to destroy my livelihood. He had taken Vanessa's post and shared it across LinkedIn, deliberately tagging the chief executive officers of my 3 biggest corporate clients. "Do not trust your corporate audits to a woman under investigation for financial fraud and elder abuse," Brandon commented on his shared post. "Allison uses her firm to launder stolen family money. Protect your shareholders." This was not just a tantrum anymore. This was a targeted, malicious campaign of corporate defamation. In the financial sector, even the whisper of fraud can cause a panic. If a multinational corporation believes their independent auditor is compromised, they will sever contracts immediately to protect their own stock prices. Brandon knew this. He was trying to hold my entire career hostage, hoping I would panic, drop the eviction, and pay them off to delete the posts. My private phone vibrated on the desk. It was Terrence. I answered immediately. Tell me you are seeing this absolute garbage. Terrence said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Vanessa is out of her mind. She is telling everyone I abandoned my son. She knows damn well my son is staying with my mother this weekend while I sort out the divorce papers. And the way she is talking about me and you, it is sickening. I am seeing it, Terrence. I replied, my voice steady and cold. They are trying to burn us both to the ground. Brandon is tagging my corporate clients on LinkedIn. They want us to beg for mercy. I am a certified public accountant, Terrence said, his anger palpable through the speaker. If my licensing board sees these accusations of me conspiring to commit financial fraud, they could suspend my license pending an investigation. This is my career, Allison. This is how I feed my son. We cannot just let them spin this narrative. We are not going to let them spin anything, I assured him. They think the internet is a weapon. They forget that I command the digital landscape for a living. I need you to stay exactly where you are. Do not reply to any of her posts. Do not send her a text message. Any communication you make right now will be twisted and used as fuel for their fake victim narrative. Let them keep posting. Let them keep digging their own legal graves. What is your plan? Terrence asked, taking a deep breath to steady himself. I am calling Harrison, I stated. Brandon just upgraded his crimes from identity theft to gross corporate defamation, libel, and tortious interference with a business contract. Every single tag on LinkedIn is another nail in his coffin. I hung up with Terrence and immediately speed-dialed my attorney. Harrison answered with his usual brisk efficiency. Tell me you have secured the screenshots, Harrison said before I could even say hello. I have the screenshots, the IP logs, the timestamps, and the complete archive of every corporate client they tagged, I confirmed. Brandon is attempting to leverage my professional reputation to force a settlement. Harrison let out a sharp, predatory laugh. Excellent. Tortious interference is my absolute favorite playground. We are drafting a cease and desist order right now, but we are not going to send it quietly. We are going to attach it to a multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit. I want you to prepare a comprehensive digital evidence packet. I am already compiling it, I replied, my fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. But Harrison, they are desperate. The internet smear campaign is just the first wave. Once they realize I am not calling them to beg for a truce, they are going to escalate. Brandon is reckless and his mother is furious. They will not stay behind a keyboard for long. You think they are going to show up in person? Harrison asked, his tone shifting to serious legal caution. I know they will, I said. Brandon is a narcissist who relies on physical intimidation and loud arguments to win. He will want an audience. He will want to make a scene where he thinks I am most vulnerable. He will come to my corporate headquarters. Then we will be ready for him, Harrison replied smoothly. I am leaving my office right now. I will meet you at your corporate building in 30 minutes. Bring the restraining orders. Bring the fraud evidence. Let the idiot walk right into the trap. I ended the call, a sharp, cold smile forming on my lips. Brandon thought he could destroy my reputation by throwing a public tantrum on the internet. He was about to find out what happens when you bring a social media post to a federal corporate knife fight. I gathered my briefcase, locked my home office, and headed out the door. The real show was about to begin. The drive to my corporate headquarters in downtown Chicago took exactly 45 minutes. I used that time to transition my mindset from a homeowner protecting her sanctuary to a chief executive officer defending her empire. My firm occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass and steel high-rise. The lobby was a vast expanse of polished white marble floor-to-ceiling windows and a state-of-the-art security checkpoint. It was designed to intimidate anyone who walked through the revolving doors. I bypassed my private parking elevator and walked directly through the main public entrance. Harrison was already waiting for me near the reception desk. He wore a razor-sharp charcoal suit and held a thick leather briefcase that I knew contained enough legal firepower to destroy several lives. I approached the head of security, a retired military veteran who ran my building with absolute precision. I gave him a very specific directive. I told him that 3 highly agitated individuals were likely going to breach the front doors within the hour. I ordered him not to block their entry into the lobby, but to lock down every single elevator bank and stairwell access point. I wanted them trapped in the wide-open public space, fully visible to the high-definition security cameras mounted in every corner. Harrison and I stood near the center of the lobby, reviewing the drafted cease and desist orders. The morning rush of employees and visiting corporate clients flowed around us. It was the perfect stage for a narcissist who desperately craved an audience. We did not have to wait long. Through the massive glass walls of the building, I saw a dented sedan screech to a halt in the loading zone. The doors flew open. Brandon marched out, his face flushed red with manic, desperate energy. Following closely behind him was Vanessa holding her smartphone up high, clearly recording the entire approach for her fabricated social media narrative. Bringing up the rear was Brenda, looking entirely stripped of her previous suburban elegance. Her hair was a messy nest, and her clothes were wrinkled from her brief but highly unpleasant stay in the county holding cell. The automatic doors slid open and the 3 of them stormed into my corporate sanctuary. They brought the chaotic, toxic energy of a daytime talk show directly into my professional domain. Allison Brandon roared, his voice echoing off the marble walls. The entire lobby ground to a sudden halt. Employees paused with their coffee cups halfway to their mouths. Visiting executives turned around, their brows furrowing in confusion. The security guards immediately stepped forward, their hands resting on their radios, but they held their positions exactly as I had instructed. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, my hands folded neatly in front of me, radiating an aura of absolute freezing calm. Harrison stood firmly at my right side, his expression unreadable. Brandon strode toward me, stopping just a few feet away. He wanted to physically intimidate me, using his height and his loud voice to assert dominance. Vanessa stood right behind his shoulder, the camera lens of her phone pointed directly at my face. I want everyone in this building to see exactly who they are working for, Brandon shouted, pivoting slightly to address the growing crowd of onlookers. Your boss is a fraud. She is a psychotic, manipulative criminal who steals from her own family. She illegally threw my elderly mother onto the street yesterday. She ruined my life, and she is laundering money through this very company. Brenda pointed a shaking finger at me, adding her shrill voice to the spectacle. She belongs in an asylum. She is a monster. I maintained steady eye contact with Brandon. I did not raise my voice to match his frantic shouting. I spoke with a quiet, piercing authority that carried perfectly through the silent lobby. You are trespassing on private commercial property, Brandon. You have exactly 1 minute to state your business before my security team physically removes you and has you arrested for public disturbance. Brandon let out a harsh, barking laugh. He thought my calm demeanor was a sign of weakness. He thought I was terrified of the public exposure. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out his ultimate weapon. He held up a sleek silver USB flash drive. He pinched it between his fingers and held it high in the air, displaying it to me and to the entire lobby like a victorious gladiator holding a severed head. I do not think you are going to call the police? Allison. Brandon sneered, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. Because you and I both know exactly what I have right here. I stared at the silver drive. It was the exact same piece of bait I had deliberately left sitting in the center of my mahogany desk at 2:30 in the morning. He had taken it. He had actually broken into my home office in his frantic scramble before the sheriff arrived and pocketed the trap I had laid for him. When you left the house yesterday morning, you forgot to lock your precious little office. Brandon lied smoothly, his voice dripping with arrogant confidence. I went inside to get my things and I found this sitting right on your desk. I plugged it into my laptop, Allison. I downloaded everything. I have your entire corporate client registry. I have the confidential financial audits you run on those big banks. I have every single dirty little secret you keep hidden in those encrypted files. Harrison shifted slightly beside me. I could sense the immense satisfaction radiating from my attorney, but neither of us broke character. "Are you threatening me, Brandon?" I asked softly, ensuring my voice was captured clearly by the overhead security microphones and Vanessa's phone. "I am giving you a business proposal," Brandon shouted back, stepping one pace closer. "You think you can freeze my bank accounts? You think you can humiliate my mother? Well, now I hold the keys to your entire empire. If this data gets leaked, your firm is finished. Your clients will sue you into oblivion. You will be disbarred, disgraced, and bankrupt. State your terms," I said, keeping my face perfectly blank. Brandon smiled, a grotesque, greedy twisting of his features. "I want $500,000 wired into a secure offshore account by the end of the business day, and I want the deed to the Chicago estate transferred solely into my name. You give me the cash and the house, and I hand over the drive. If you refuse or if you try to call the cops, I walk out those doors and I sell this entire database to your biggest corporate competitors. They will pay millions for the forensic secrets you are hiding." Vanessa stepped up next to him, thrusting her phone closer to my face. "You heard him, Allison. Pay up or we ruin you. We are not leaving here until we get what we deserve." I looked at Brandon, then at Vanessa, and finally at Brenda, who was nodding vigorously in agreement with this massive criminal conspiracy. They had just walked into the lobby of a major financial institution, surrounded by high-definition security cameras and dozens of witnesses, and explicitly committed federal extortion, corporate blackmail, and grand larceny. I looked back at the silver USB drive gleaming in Brandon's hand. He thought he was holding a nuclear bomb that would destroy my life. He had absolutely no idea that he was actually holding the pin to a hand grenade, and he had already pulled it. I did not gasp. I did not beg. Instead, a sound escaped my lips that completely derailed Brandon's triumphant moment. I laughed. It was not a nervous chuckle. It was a full, resonant, chest-deep laugh that echoed across the marble lobby. The security guards exchanged confused glances. The corporate executives, pausing their morning commutes, stopped to watch the spectacle unfold. Brandon lowered the silver flash drive a fraction of an inch, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. Vanessa lowered her phone slightly, her fabricated victim narrative stumbling against my genuine amusement. Brenda glared at me, her face turning a violent shade of purple. "Are you insane?" Brandon demanded, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure of my reaction. "I just told you I have your entire corporate client registry. I have the files that will put you in federal prison. I hold your entire life in the palm of my hand." I stopped laughing, letting the silence stretch for a long, agonizing second. I took a slow step forward, my high heels clicking sharply against the polished stone floor. Harrison stepped up beside me, reaching into his thick leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue clip. He extended his arm, slapping the papers directly against Brandon's chest with a forceful thud. Brandon reflexively grabbed the stack, clutching it along with the silver USB drive. "What you are holding right now," Harrison stated, his voice projecting with practiced courtroom authority, "are formal restraining orders filed in the state of Illinois, effectively banning you, your mother, and your sister from coming within 500 feet of my client or her business properties. Furthermore, you have just been formally served with federal civil summons for identity theft, wire fraud, and grand larceny." Brandon sneered, waving the legal papers away as if they were trash. "You think a restraining order scares me? I have the leverage, I have the data. You are going to drop those lawsuits or I am hitting send on these files." I crossed my arms and looked Brandon directly in the eyes. "Prove it." Brandon blinked. "Excuse me?" I said, "Prove it." I repeated, my voice ringing with absolute chilling clarity. "You stand here in the lobby of my company surrounded by my employees, and my cameras claiming you possess my most sensitive financial forensic data. If you are going to extort me for $500,000 and a multi-million-dollar estate, you need to show me the merchandise. Prove to me that you actually managed to bypass my military-grade encryption. Pull out your laptop, plug that silver drive in, and show me the files." Vanessa shoved her phone back into Brandon's face. "Do it, Brandon," she urged, her voice shrill with greedy anticipation. "Show everyone what a fraud she is. Expose her right here." Brandon hesitated. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was a salesman. He operated on Bluff's fast talking and intimidation, but his ego was far too massive to back down in front of a crowd, especially with his sister broadcasting the entire confrontation to her social media followers. He unzipped the leather messenger bag slung across his shoulder and pulled out his sleek silver work laptop. It was the expensive machine provided by his company, the one he used daily to connect to his corporate sales network. He flipped the laptop open and balanced it on his forearm. The screen glowed to life. He looked at me with a sneer of absolute triumph. "You asked for this, Allison. Say goodbye to your empire." He took the silver USB flash drive and shoved it directly into the port on the side of his laptop. I watched the small LED light on the drive blink rapidly. I did not blink. I did not look away. I watched the exact moment his entire life shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. Brandon tapped his trackpad, waiting for the File Explorer window to pop up and display my supposedly stolen secrets. Instead, his computer screen flickered violently. The bright, colorful desktop background vanished, replaced by a solid, pitch-black screen. A split second later, a massive, glaring red warning banner flashed across the display. A string of complex, rapidly scrolling alphanumeric code cascaded down the monitor. "What the hell is this?" Brandon muttered, tapping the keys frantically. "The computer is freezing up." I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the sweet taste of absolute victory settle into my lungs. "Did you honestly think stealing data from a financial forensics expert was that easy, Brandon?" I asked, my voice slicing through his rising panic like a razor blade. "Did you truly believe a man who cannot even file his own basic tax returns without my help could somehow breach a biometric, multi-tiered encrypted security network?" Brandon slammed his finger against the power button, but the machine was completely unresponsive. The red banner on the screen began pulsing ominously. "You did not steal my client data," I explained, stepping forward so he could hear every single syllable clearly. "You stole a quarantined piece of bait. That silver USB drive you swiped from my mahogany desk contains a highly aggressive military-grade ransomware payload. It is a virus designed to test corporate network vulnerabilities. And you just unleashed it." Brenda gasped, grabbing Brandon's arm. "What does she mean?" "Brandon, what did you do?" I did not let him answer. "The moment you plugged that drive into your laptop, the payload executed automatically." I continued, my tone relentless and punishing. "And because you are using your corporate machine, which automatically connects to your employer's virtual private network, the second you boot it up, the virus did not just lock your laptop. It immediately crawled through your VPN connection and infected your entire corporate network." Brandon stared at me, his mouth opening and closing in silent horror. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. "You just deployed a devastating ransomware attack directly into the main servers of the company where you work as a regional sales director," I stated, making sure the lobby cameras captured his absolute destruction. "You just locked their client databases, their financial records, and their internal communications. You did not ruin my company today, Brandon. You just completely spectacularly destroyed your own company." As if guided by a perfectly timed theatrical cue, the cell phone in Brandon's pocket began to ring. The loud, generic ringtone echoed in the dead silence of the marble lobby. Brandon slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out the phone. The caller ID displayed the name of his chief executive officer. Brandon's hands were shaking so violently, he almost dropped the device. He swiped the screen to answer and slowly pressed the phone to his ear. He did not even have the chance to say hello. Even standing several feet away, I could hear the muffled explosive screaming radiating from the phone speaker. The CEO was screaming about an unprecedented system failure, a catastrophic data breach, and tracing the origin point directly to Brandon's assigned hardware. "No, sir, please listen," Brandon stammered, his voice cracking, tears of absolute panic welling in his eyes. "It was a mistake. I did not know. Someone planted it on me." The screaming on the other end only intensified. I heard the words "terminated immediately, federal authorities and multi-million-dollar lawsuit" before the line went dead, with a sharp click. Brandon lowered the phone. The arrogant, slick salesman who had strutted into my lobby demanding $500,000 was gone. His knees buckled. He dropped the infected laptop onto the hard marble floor and collapsed to his knees, his hands covering his face as he began to openly, pathetically sob. Brenda fell to her knees beside him, wailing and clutching his shoulders, realizing that her golden child had just annihilated their last remaining source of income. I looked down at them with zero pity. But the show was not completely over. Vanessa was still standing there, gripping her phone tightly. Her face was twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. She pointed her finger directly at my chest, ready to launch her final desperate attack. Vanessa's hand was shaking violently, but her face was twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. She pointed her finger directly at my chest, her acrylic nails practically vibrating with rage. "You think you are so smart?" Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing harshly off the high ceilings of the marble lobby. "You think you ruined my brother, but you forgot exactly who you are dealing with." She held her smartphone higher, making sure the camera lens captured every second of what she believed would be my ultimate, inescapable humiliation. She wanted her online followers to see me crumble. She wanted to broadcast my defeat to the entire world. "Go ahead and gloat about your stupid computer virus, Allison," Vanessa sneered, stepping closer. "Because while you were busy playing hacker with Brandon, I was hitting you where it actually hurts. Your wallet." I did not interrupt her. I did not try to snatch the phone from her hands. In my profession, when a criminal starts a voluntary confession, you let them speak until they run completely out of breath. "You thought you locked us out of everything?" Vanessa crowed, a sickeningly triumphant smile stretching across her face. "But Terrence is not the only one in my household who knows his way around a financial statement. I found the routing numbers for your offshore backup account, the one you thought you kept perfectly hidden. I logged into the portal this morning while we were packing up the rental truck. I initiated a direct, untraceable wire transfer. I drained exactly $100,000 from your secret stash, Allison. It is gone. It is sitting in an encrypted shell account that you will never ever find." "So tell me who is the real loser here." Brenda stopped wailing over her ruined son for a fraction of a second. A glimmer of greedy hope flashed in the older woman's tear-stained eyes. Brandon looked up from the floor, his face suddenly displaying a pathetic, desperate spark of salvation. They actually believed Vanessa had just saved their sinking ship. They thought she had secured their retirement fund. I looked at Vanessa. I did not scream. I did not panic. I slowly raised my left arm, pulling back the cuff of my blazer, and glanced at the face of my watch. 10 seconds, I said softly. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa snapped, her triumphant smile faltering for the very first time. "I am counting down," I replied, my voice ringing with an icy, lethal calm. "Because you just confessed to committing federal wire fraud on a live broadcast, Vanessa. And the people who monitor those specific financial transactions are very, very punctual." Right on cue, the heavy revolving doors at the front of the lobby began to spin. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as a group of highly coordinated individuals marched into the building. Leading the pack was Terrence. He was dressed in a sharp-tailored navy suit, looking every bit the high-powered certified public accountant he was. But he was not alone. Flanking him on both sides were 4 individuals wearing heavy tactical vests. Printed across the back of those vests in bold, unmistakable yellow letters were the initials FBI. Vanessa lowered her phone, her mouth falling open in sheer paralyzed disbelief. Terrence did not look at Brandon. He did not look at Brenda. He walked straight toward his wife, stopping just a few feet away from where she stood frozen. His expression was not angry. It was something far worse. It was the absolute clinical detachment of a man who had completely severed all emotional ties and was ready to deliver a fatal verdict. "Hello, Vanessa," Terrence said, his voice echoing clearly across the silent lobby. "I see you finally decided to put your internet banking skills to use." "Terrence, what is this?" Vanessa stammered, taking a shaky step backward. "Why are federal agents here? Tell them to arrest Allison." She is the one hiding money. I just took back what belongs to our family. Terrence let out a dry, humorless laugh. He adjusted his suit jacket and looked his wife directly in the eyes. You did not steal from Allison, Terrence stated, enunciating every single word, so the reality of her situation could properly shatter her delusion. That offshore backup account you thought you magically discovered was not a hidden asset. It was a honeypot. It was a decoy account established exclusively by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, monitored around the clock by their cybercrimes division. Vanessa's face drained of all color. The smartphone slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered loudly against the marble floor, the screen cracking instantly. When I packed my bags and left you at 2 in the morning, I did not just go to a hotel. Terrence continued delivering the fatal blow with masterful precision. I went directly to the federal field office. I handed over the physical hard drive containing all the proof of you opening fraudulent lines of credit in my name. I showed them the paper trail of you siphoning $50,000 to fund your mother's gambling addiction. But the federal agents needed to catch you actively executing a cybercrime to immediately secure an arrest warrant without a lengthy grand jury indictment. I stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Terrence. We were the professionals. They were the parasites. So Terrence and I coordinated a trap, I explained, looking down at the pathetic trio. I deliberately left an unencrypted digital breadcrumb on the home network, leading to that specific routing number. We knew your sheer greed would blind you to basic security protocols. We knew you would try to steal whatever you could get your hands on before the eviction was finalized. You authorized a wire transfer of $100,000 across state lines. A tall, imposing FBI agent stepped forward, his badge gleaming under the bright lobby lights. That action constitutes felony wire fraud, computer intrusion, and money laundering under federal statutes. The moment you hit confirm on your web browser, our system flagged your IP address. You did not secure a retirement fund, ma'am. You secured a federal indictment. Vanessa let out a horrific guttural shriek. It was the sound of a predator realizing it had just walked directly into a steel cage. She lunged backward wildly, looking for an exit, but 2 federal agents were already moving in with practiced, inescapable speed. Vanessa, turn around and place your hands behind your back, the agent commanded, his tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. No, you cannot do this! Vanessa screamed, thrashing wildly as the agents grabbed her arms. I am a mother. Terrence, tell them to stop. Brandon, do something. Mom, help me. Brandon was still kneeling on the floor next to his infected laptop, completely catatonic. Brenda was weeping hysterically, clutching her chest as she watched her daughter being violently subdued. Neither of them could offer a single ounce of help. They were drowning in the exact same sinking ship. The harsh metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the lobby for the second time that day. The agent secured Vanessa's wrists tightly behind her back. You have the right to remain silent. The agent began reciting the Miranda warning, his voice steady over Vanessa's chaotic sobbing. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Terrence looked at his wife in handcuffs. There was no pity in his eyes. There was only the exhausted relief of a hostage who had finally broken his chains. I already filed the emergency custody orders this morning, Terrence told her quietly. My son is safe. You will never use him as leverage against me again. My lawyer will serve you the divorce papers in federal lockup. Vanessa dissolved into absolute hyperventilating panic as the agents marched her forcibly toward the revolving doors. She twisted her neck, shooting one final venomous glare in my direction. This is your fault, Allison, she shrieked, tears streaming down her face. You ruined us. I watched her being dragged away, surrounded by federal agents heading straight for a transport vehicle. I did not flinch. I did not feel a single drop of remorse. No, Vanessa, I said softly to the empty space she left behind. I just handed you the rope. You are the one who decided to tie the knot. 3 months later, the air inside the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago was thick and suffocating. The polished mahogany benches and towering marble pillars offered a stark contrast to the absolute filth that was about to be dragged into the light. I sat perfectly straight at the plaintiff table wearing a tailored charcoal suit, my hands folded neatly over a pristine leather folder. Beside me sat Harrison looking like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. Across the aisle, the defense table looked like a tragic comedy. Brandon, Brenda, and Vanessa sat huddled together, a pathetic portrait of ruined entitlement. Brandon wore a poorly fitted suit that looked like it had been pulled from the back of a discount rack. His previously immaculate hair was thinning, his posture hunched and defeated. Brenda sat next to him, her roots completely grown out, clutching a crumpled tissue and attempting to project the image of a frail, misunderstood grandmother. Vanessa, having spent the last 90 days in federal holding due to her flight risk status, wore a standard-issue jumpsuit glaring at the floor with hollow, sunken eyes. Because their assets had been entirely frozen or seized by federal authorities, they could not afford the high-powered legal defense they so desperately needed. Instead, they had hired a bargain bin attorney named Mr. Gable, a man who looked perpetually sweaty and overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the federal charges raining down on his clients. The presiding judge, a no-nonsense woman with decades of experience in financial crimes, adjusted her glasses and signaled for the defense to begin their preliminary arguments for this combined criminal and civil hearing. Mr. Gable stood up, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. He immediately launched into the exact fabricated narrative we had anticipated. He tried to paint me as a ruthless, wealthy corporate tyrant who had maliciously set up a naive, loving family out of pure spite. Your Honor. Mr. Gable began, his voice wavering slightly under the judge's sharp gaze. My clients are not criminal masterminds. They are simply a family who made some poor, desperate decisions during a time of extreme emotional distress. The plaintiff, a highly aggressive financial expert, used her immense wealth and specialized knowledge to entrap them. The credit card usage was merely a misunderstanding between a newly engaged couple. The transfer of the home was a vindictive, sudden act to render an elderly woman homeless. This entire ordeal is a gross overreaction by a scorned, vindictive woman looking to punish her fiancé over cold feet. I did not flinch. I did not sigh. I simply turned my head and offered Harrison a micro-expression of absolute boredom. Harrison smirked, buttoned his suit jacket, and stood up. He did not yell. He did not pace around the room waving his arms to create cheap theatrical drama. He simply walked over to the evidence projector and connected his secure tablet. Your Honor! Harrison set his voice a low, resonant boom that instantly commanded the entire room. The defense claims this was a simple misunderstanding. They claim my client is a vindictive predator. I would like to submit Exhibit A to the court, which will definitively prove that the only predators in this room are currently sitting at the defense table. A massive document flashed onto the high-definition screens across the courtroom. It was the fraudulent post-nuptial agreement Terrence had intercepted on the night of the rehearsal dinner. This document, Harrison continued pacing slowly toward the witness stand, is a unilateral transfer of assets. It was drafted by a disbarred paralegal hired secretly by Brandon and Vanessa. It explicitly states that upon signing, my client would forfeit 50% of her multi-million-dollar forensic accounting firm and 50% of her residential estate to Brandon. Mr. Gable jumped up from his seat. Objection, Your Honor. There is no proof my clients ever intended to execute that unverified document. It is merely a draft downloaded from the internet. Harrison did not even look at him. He simply tapped his tablet, bringing up an entirely new slide. I submit Exhibit B, Your Honor, Harrison stated smoothly, ignoring the desperate objection entirely. This is a sworn, notarized affidavit from the head bartender hired for the wedding reception. The affidavit confirms that the defendant Vanessa offered him $5,000 in cash to heavily spike the bride's drinks with a potent narcotic throughout the evening. We also have the encrypted text messages between Vanessa and Brandon detailing their explicit plan to wait until my client was chemically incapacitated, bring her to the bridal suite, and physically force her hand to sign this fraudulent contract under the guise of a venue noise waiver. A collective audible gasp echoed from the gallery. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits as she stared down at the defense table. Brandon shrank so far into his chair he practically disappeared. Brenda dropped her tissue, her jaw hanging open in sheer terror. They had no idea we had found the bartender. They had no idea their vile predatory scheme was fully documented in federal records. But Harrison was not finished. He was just getting warmed up. He tapped the screen again, shifting gears with ruthless mechanical efficiency. The defense also claims the unauthorized use of my client's social security number was a simple fiancé misunderstanding. Harrison said, bringing up a complex digital roadmap filled with red data points. Exhibit C contains the raw IP address logs, the geolocation tracking, and the device identification codes retrieved directly from the credit bureaus by federal investigators. These logs prove that Brandon applied for $50,000 credit limits while sitting in his corporate office using a secure virtual private network to try and mask his location. He then routed the physical cards to a private post office box he opened 3 days prior. Harrison turned his back to the screens and stared directly at Mr. Gable. You do not rent a secret mailbox for a marital misunderstanding. You rent it to commit calculated, premeditated felony identity theft. Every single keystroke Brandon made was captured, time-stamped, and preserved. He tried to hide his tracks from a woman whose entire career is built on finding needles in digital haystacks. The air in the courtroom grew incredibly heavy. The suffocating weight of undeniable concrete financial evidence was crushing the defense. Mr. Gable was shuffling his papers frantically, his face glistening with panic, desperately searching for a legal loophole that simply did not exist. The defendants did not make a mistake, Your Honor. Harrison concluded, his voice ringing with absolute finality. They executed a coordinated, malicious financial strike against my client. They operated as a highly organized criminal syndicate, using familial trust as a weapon to drain accounts, forge documents, and plan a physical assault to steal a corporate empire. We are not asking for leniency today. We are demanding maximum federal sentencing for every single charge listed on this docket. Harrison walked back and took his seat next to me. The silence in the courtroom was absolute and terrifying. The judge stared at Brandon, Brenda, and Vanessa with a look of pure judicial disgust. Their cheap lawyer slowly sat down, realizing he had just walked into a legal slaughterhouse. The trap had entirely snapped shut, and the walls were closing in on them. The heavy silence in the courtroom was finally broken by the sharp, authoritative crack of the judge's gavel. She shifted her piercing gaze from the trembling figure of Brandon to the woman sitting rigidly beside him. Brenda was gripping her crumpled tissue so tightly, her knuckles had turned completely white. Her previous strategy of acting like an aggressive, entitled matriarch had entirely vanished. Now she was desperately attempting to play the role of a frail, confused, innocent grandmother who had simply been swept up in her son's unfortunate mistakes. Mr. Gable stood up again, his suit jacket wrinkled, and his confidence completely shattered by the previous evidentiary beating. He cleared his throat, attempting to salvage whatever tiny fraction of sympathy the court might still possess for the elderly woman. Your Honor. Mr. Gable began, his voice lacking any real conviction. While the evidence against Brandon is certainly complex, I must implore the court to look at my client Brenda. She is a 62-year-old widow. She was recently evicted from her home and was highly emotionally distressed. She had absolutely no knowledge of the unauthorized credit accounts or the fraudulent contracts her son and daughter were allegedly drafting. She simply needed a roof over her head. She is a victim of circumstance, a vulnerable senior citizen who should not be penalized for the actions of the younger generation. Punishing her would be a cruel overreach of the justice system. I leaned back in my chair and rested my hands on the mahogany table. I looked at Harrison. He did not even bother to write down a note. He just offered me a brief predatory smile before standing up to address the bench. Your Honor, Harrison said, his voice echoing smoothly across the room. The defense is asking you to believe that Brenda is a fragile, innocent bystander. They want you to believe she is a victim of her own children. But in the world of forensic accounting, we do not rely on tears or tissues. We rely on ledgers. And Brenda's ledger tells a story of systematic, calculated, and highly lucrative federal fraud. Mr. Gable sank back into his chair, rubbing his temples. He knew exactly what was coming. When a forensic auditor points their scope at your life, nothing remains buried. When my client initiated a trace on the funds used to pay off Brenda's immediate casino debts, Harrison continued pacing slowly in front of the evidence screens. She had to verify the origin accounts. We already established that Brandon used my client's stolen identity to pay $30,000 to a casino holding company. But that raised a very interesting professional question for my client. How was an unemployed widow sustaining a high-roller gambling addiction for over a decade before Brandon resorted to identity theft? Harrison tapped his tablet. A new set of financial documents flooded the high-definition screens. They were not credit card statements. They were federal banking records, adorned with official government seals. "I submit." Exhibit D, Harrison announced, his tone turning razor-sharp. "This is a comprehensive 10-year audit of a checking account registered to Brenda's late husband. According to state death registries, he passed away exactly 120 months ago. However, according to the federal pension system, he has been alive and well, receiving direct deposits of his full government retirement benefits on the first of every single month for the last 10 years. A shockwave ripped through the courtroom. Stealing from a private citizen was a serious crime, but defrauding the federal government was an entirely different tier of legal destruction. Brenda let out a sharp, panicked gasp. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, realizing that the deepest, darkest secret of her entire life had just been projected onto a 20-foot screen in a federal courthouse. "Your Honor," Harrison stated, pointing a firm finger at the projected bank statements. For 10 consecutive years, Brenda failed to report her husband's death to the pension authority. She actively forged his signature on the annual proof of life verification forms required by the government. She maintained his private checking account, allowing the federal funds to deposit automatically. She then systematically transferred those funds into a secondary shell account under her maiden name, effectively washing the money before withdrawing it as cash directly on the casino floor. The judge was staring at the screens, her jaw tight with absolute fury. Defrauding a federal pension program was a direct insult to the court. She stole over $400,000 in federal funds over the course of a decade. Harrison continued, his voice ringing like a hammer striking an anvil. But her hubris did not stop there. Because these funds were technically stolen, Brenda never declared a single penny of this income to the Internal Revenue Service. She committed a decade of aggravated tax evasion while using federal dollars to fund her slot machine addiction. Mr. Gable did not even attempt to stand up and object. There was absolutely no defense against a certified forensic paper trail detailing 10 years of federal theft. He simply sat there staring at his legal pad, actively calculating how quickly he could recuse himself from this catastrophic nightmare. "She is not a frail, confused widow," Harrison concluded, turning his piercing gaze directly onto Brenda. "She is a seasoned, calculated grifter who has been stealing from the taxpayers of this country for 10 years. The only reason her scheme collapsed was because she got too greedy. If she had not forced her way into my client's home, demanding to sleep in her bed and throwing her belongings into the hallway, my client would have never opened an investigation. Her own staggering entitlement is the sole reason she is sitting at that defense table today." Harrison took his seat. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The judge looked down from the bench, her expression carved from pure ice. She adjusted her glasses and addressed the defense table with a voice that offered zero mercy. "The court has reviewed the submitted financial records," the judge stated clearly. "The evidence of federal pension fraud and tax evasion is overwhelming and irrefutable. Based on the severity of these federal offenses, I am immediately revoking any and all state-provided welfare benefits the defendant currently receives. Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate freezing of all remaining assets tied to her name for federal restitution." Brenda began to shake violently. The crumpled tissue fell from her hands. This court is officially referring this specific matter to the federal prosecutor's office for immediate criminal indictment. The judge continued, delivering the final crushing blow. You are facing mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines for defrauding a federal institution. You will be looking at significant time in a federal penitentiary. The reality of the judge's words finally penetrated the thick delusional armor Brenda had worn her entire life. The realization that her golden years would not be spent in a luxury master bedroom, but inside a concrete federal prison cell, hit her with the force of a freight train. Brenda let out a horrific, guttural wail that echoed off the marble walls of the courtroom. The facade of the innocent grandmother completely dissolved. She collapsed forward, her head hitting the heavy wooden table of the defense stand as she began to sob uncontrollably. She reached out, grabbing Brandon's arm, her fingers digging desperately into the fabric of his cheap suit. "Brandon, do something!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of sheer panic. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them I did not know. You have to fix this right now. Please do not let them put me in a cell." Brandon did not move. He did not comfort her. He simply sat there, staring blankly ahead, entirely paralyzed by his own impending doom. He could not save her. He could not even save himself. They were both sinking to the bottom of the ocean, dragged down by the heavy chains of their own phenomenal greed. I sat quietly at the plaintiff table, my posture perfect, my expression serene. I watched the woman who had sneered at me, who had ordered me to sleep on my own sofa, weeping hysterically as her entire life was legally dismantled. It was a flawless, devastating execution of justice, and we still had two more defendants left to destroy. The echoing wails of Brenda were finally silenced as two court bailiffs escorted the hysterical woman into a holding room adjacent to the courtroom. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut, leaving a tense, electrified atmosphere in their wake. Brandon remained slumped in his chair, a thoroughly defeated shell of a man. But the legal execution was far from over. There was one remaining parasite at the defense table who needed to be permanently eradicated. Vanessa sat in her standard-issue federal jumpsuit. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and her sunken eyes burned with a toxic mixture of panic and pure venom. She had spent the last 90 days in federal lockup, a stark contrast to the luxurious lifestyle she had tried to steal. The judge adjusted her microphone and looked down at her docket. "The prosecution may call its next witness," the judge stated, her voice carrying a sharp, no-nonsense authority. Harrison stood up, smoothing the front of his tailored suit. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Terrence to the stand." The heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Terrence walked down the center aisle, and the entire room seemed to shift. He wore an immaculate, razor-sharp navy blue suit. His posture was perfectly straight, projecting the absolute confidence of a man who had walked through hell and emerged completely fireproof. He did not look angry. He looked clinical. He walked past the defense table without sparing Vanessa a single glance, climbed the steps to the witness box, and swore the oath. I sat back in my chair, allowing myself a small, satisfied smile. Terrence and I had orchestrated this exact moment over dozens of encrypted phone calls during the past 3 months. He was not just a star witness. He was the executioner. Harrison approached the podium. "Please state your name and profession for the record." "My name is Terrence," he replied, his deep voice carrying clearly across the silent courtroom. "I am a certified public accountant, fully licensed and practicing in the state of Illinois." "And what is your relationship to the defendant?" Vanessa Harrison asked. Terrence folded his hands, resting them on the wooden railing of the witness box. "I am currently legally married to her. However, I would like to address the court on that specific matter right now." Terrence reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. He turned to the court bailiff standing nearby and handed it over. "I am formally requesting the court bailiff to serve this document to the defense table," Terrence stated smoothly. Mr. Gable, the perpetually sweating defense attorney, looked completely bewildered. He accepted the envelope from the bailiff and ripped it open. Vanessa leaned over his shoulder, her eyes darting across the heavy legal text. "What is this?" Vanessa hissed, her voice cracking as the reality of the document set in. "It is a unilateral petition for divorce," Terrence answered, staring directly at her for the very first time. "Along with an emergency motion for sole legal and physical custody of our son. You are being served in open court, Vanessa." Vanessa jumped up from her chair, the heavy chains around her ankles rattling loudly against the wooden floor. "You cannot do this to me," she screamed, her face twisting in absolute rage. "I am your wife. We are a family. You are supposed to protect me." "Order in this court," the judge barked, slamming her gavel down with a sharp, deafening crack. "Defendant, sit down immediately, or you will be restrained." Vanessa dropped back into her seat, breathing heavily, shooting daggers of pure hatred at the man on the witness stand. Harrison did not miss a beat. He stepped forward, ready to dismantle her completely. "Terrence, as a certified public accountant, did you have occasion to audit your own personal household finances following the events of October 12th? "I did," Terrence replied, his tone shifting into absolute professional detachment. "Because my wife was actively participating in the attempted theft of a multi-million-dollar estate, I suspected our own marital accounts had been compromised. My forensic audit revealed a highly systematic, premeditated campaign of domestic financial abuse." Harrison directed the court's attention to the evidence screens. "I submit Exhibit E, Your Honor." Terrence gestured to the financial documents appearing on the monitors. Over the course of 14 months, Vanessa bypassed the multi-factor authentication on my personal devices. She intercepted my secure mail. She then forged my digital signature to execute 3 separate high-yield personal loans, totaling $50,000. She funneled this stolen capital through a decentralized digital payment processor to avoid standard banking flags. "And where did those funds go?" Harrison asked, leading the witness perfectly. "Every single dollar was routed directly to her mother Brenda to cover exorbitant casino markers and prevent illegal loan sharks from collecting on gambling debts," Terrence stated. "Vanessa burdened my name, my credit score, and my professional standing with $500,000 of debt without my knowledge or consent. She used my career as a shield for her family's criminal enterprise." Mr. Gable sat completely frozen. He had absolutely nothing to say. You cannot cross-examine a master accountant who brings irrefutable banking logs to a federal hearing. But the domestic fraud is not why the defendant is wearing a federal jumpsuit today, is it? Harrison prompted, turning the focus to the final fatal blow. "No, it is not," Terrence confirmed. "On the morning of October 13th, I stood in the lobby of my colleague's corporate headquarters. I personally witnessed Vanessa admit to bypassing a secure server. I watched her hold up her smartphone and brag about initiating a wire transfer of $100,000 across state lines." "And whose account was she attempting to rob?" Harrison asked. "She believed she was robbing the plaintiff," Allison, Terrence said, glancing briefly at me with a look of profound mutual respect. "But as a licensed financial professional, I had already identified the account she was targeting. I knew it was a federal honeypot. It was a decoy account established exclusively by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to track cyber syndicates. When Vanessa hit confirm on that wire transfer, she committed federal wire fraud, computer intrusion, and money laundering in a single keystroke. She caught herself in a federal trap because her greed completely blinded her to basic digital security protocols. Vanessa could no longer contain the venom boiling inside her. She slammed her hands down on the defense table, ignoring her lawyer's frantic whispers. "You set me up!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the high ceilings. "You and that cold-blooded corporate witch planned this. You sold me out. You were nothing before my family took you in. You owe us everything." Terrence did not raise his voice. He did not yell. He simply leaned into the microphone, his voice cutting through her hysterical screaming like a freshly sharpened blade. "Your family took my credit score," Vanessa, Terrence stated, delivering the absolute final word. "I built my career with my own 2 hands. You just leached off it until there was nothing left. I am not selling you out. I am taking out the trash." The judge brought her gavel down twice in rapid succession. The loud cracking sound commanded instant silence. "That is enough," the judge declared, her voice radiating pure judicial wrath. The evidence presented today is staggering. The defendant utilized her own husband as a financial shield and then willingly attempted to rob a federal decoy account out of sheer unadulterated malice. The judge turned her attention directly to the custody motion sitting on her desk. Based on the irrefutable evidence of ongoing federal crimes, severe financial instability, and the defendant's current status as an incarcerated flight risk, I am granting the emergency motion in full. Terrence is hereby awarded sole legal and physical custody of the minor child immediately. The defendant is stripped of all visitation rights pending a comprehensive psychological evaluation. Vanessa let out a horrific, guttural wail. She lunged forward, trying to grab her lawyer, trying to reach the witness stand, but two federal marshals were already closing in on her from behind. Furthermore, the judge continued, completely ignoring the hysterical woman being restrained by law enforcement. Due to the severity of the wire fraud and money laundering charges, I am revoking any possibility of bail. The defendant is remanded to federal custody, pending transfer to a penitentiary for sentencing. Vanessa screamed and cursed, hurling vile insults at Terrence, at me, and at the judge, as the marshals forcibly dragged her away from the defense table. Her voice faded down the long, echoing corridor of the courthouse, leaving behind a profound, beautifully quiet room. Terrence stepped down from the witness box. He walked over to the plaintiff table and stood beside me. We looked at the empty chairs where the arrogant, parasitic family had sat just an hour ago. The checkmate was absolute. We had burned their entire empire to the ground, and we did not even have to light the match ourselves. They had gladly provided the gasoline. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind the federal marshals, leaving the courtroom in a stunned, ringing silence. Two parasites had been systematically excised from the host. There was only one left. Brandon sat alone at the defense table. His mother was in a holding cell. His sister was in federal transit. He was entirely isolated, stripped of his arrogant sales pitch and his familial shield. He looked up at the judge, his eyes wide with the desperate, panicked realization of a cornered animal. Mr. Gable stood up for the final time. The defense attorney was sweating profusely, his tie loosened clearly, regretting every life choice that had led him to represent this catastrophic family. However, he had a legal obligation to mount a defense no matter how absurd it sounded. Your Honor. Mr. Gable began, his voice lacking any of its previous theatricality. We must separate the actions of the mother and sister from my client Brandon. The prosecution has painted a picture of a criminal mastermind, but we are looking at a simple domestic dispute blown wildly out of proportion. Regarding the unauthorized credit accounts, Brandon and Allison were engaged to be married in less than 48 hours. They were actively merging their lives. My client operated under the legal assumption of implied mutual consent. He utilized her Social Security number to manage unexpected family expenses, believing that as future husband and wife, their financial burdens would be shared. It was poor judgment, perhaps, but it was not malicious federal identity theft. It was the frantic action of a desperate groom trying to save his mother from homelessness before walking down the aisle. I sat perfectly still, my face a mask of absolute terrifying calm. I did not need to shout an objection. I just looked at Harrison. Harrison stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket, with the deliberate precision of an executioner preparing the guillotine. Implied mutual consent, Harrison repeated, letting the words roll off his tongue like a bad joke. The defense is asking this court to believe that stealing a woman's secure federal identity to fund a gambling addict is a standard prenuptial bonding exercise. Your Honor, forensic accounting does not deal in assumptions. We deal in absolute recorded reality. I would like to direct the court's attention to the monitors for Exhibit F. The massive screens flickered to life. The courtroom was instantly filled with the crisp, high-definition night vision footage from the hidden security camera installed directly above the door of my home office. The timestamp in the corner read 2:45 in the morning on October 13th. On the screen, Brandon was creeping down the dark hallway. He was holding his cell phone to his ear, speaking in a harsh, hurried whisper. The audio was crystal clear. I am telling you, the paperwork is hidden in her office. Brandon's voice echoed through the federal courtroom, confirming his absolute guilt to a silent audience. She has no idea I used her social security number to open those platinum cards. I maxed them both out yesterday. Once the marriage certificate is signed on Sunday, the debt becomes marital property. She will be legally trapped. I just need to find her client ledgers tonight to use as leverage in case she notices the credit hit before the ceremony. The video showed Brandon testing the handle of my locked office door, failing to enter, and then pacing angrily before spotting the silver USB drive I had deliberately left near the edge of a hallway console table as bait. He snatched it up, a greedy, malicious smirk crossing his face. "I have got her backup drive," Brandon whispered into the phone on the recording. "I am downloading her entire corporate database. We own her now." Harrison tapped his tablet, and the video feed froze on Brandon's smug criminal face. "Implied consent," Harrison stated, his voice booming with judicial wrath. The defendant explicitly admitted on tape that his victim had zero knowledge of the identity theft. He explicitly admitted his plan to trap her in marital debt. He explicitly detailed his intention to steal corporate data to blackmail her into submission. "There is no domestic dispute here, Your Honor. There is only a calculated predatory scheme to financially enslave a highly successful woman." Mr. Gable slowly sank into his chair and buried his face in his hands. He did not even bother to look at Brandon. But the financial devastation of the defendant does not end with identity theft. Harrison continued pacing toward the center of the room. "The defense claims Brandon is just a desperate groom. In reality, he is a corporate terrorist. When the defendant stole that silver USB drive, he believed he was stealing my client's forensic database. Instead, he stole a highly aggressive ransomware payload. He then willingly and maliciously plugged that drive into his employer's secure network." Harrison pulled a thick, freshly stamped legal binder from his briefcase and slammed it down onto the defense table right in front of Brandon's shaking hands. As of 9:00 this morning, Harrison announced, his tone merciless, "The corporate entity previously known as your employer has officially filed a civil lawsuit against you in this very courthouse. By deploying that ransomware, you caused a catastrophic system-wide shutdown of their global sales database. You corrupted thousands of secure client files. They are suing you personally for gross negligence, corporate sabotage, and breach of fiduciary duty. They are seeking $25 million in immediate compensatory damages." Brandon let out a strangled, pathetic gasp. He stared at the massive legal binder as if it were a venomous snake. His entire body began to tremble violently. The realization that he was not just facing federal prison, but a lifetime of insurmountable, crushing corporate debt completely broke his mind. "You cannot do this to me." Brandon whimpered, his voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch. "I have nothing. I do not have $25 million. I do not have a house. I do not have a job. You took everything from me." Harrison leaned over the table, looking down at the ruined man. "We did not take anything from you, Brandon. We simply handed you the bill for your own spectacular arrogance." The judge struck her gavel, the sound echoing like a final gunshot. "The court has heard enough. The audio and visual evidence of premeditated federal identity theft and attempted corporate extortion is overwhelming. The defense's argument of implied consent is entirely rejected." The judge looked down at Brandon with absolute disgust. "You attempted to financially destroy an innocent woman and ended up destroying the very corporation that employed you. Your sheer greed is matched only by your staggering incompetence. You are hereby remanded to federal custody without bail pending final sentencing." Two armed federal marshals stepped forward, grabbing Brandon by the arms and hauling him roughly out of his chair. He did not fight back. His legs were completely useless, dragging against the polished floor as they pulled him toward the holding cell doors. The slick, confident regional sales director who had tried to conquer my empire was now nothing more than a terrified, bankrupt prisoner heading straight to federal lockup. The courtroom remained in a state of suspended animation as the judge organized the thick stack of legal files on her elevated bench. The digital clock on the wall seemed to tick louder with every passing second, counting down the final moments of a man who had built his entire existence on a foundation of lies. Brandon was standing now forced upright by the federal marshals gripping his arms. His cheap, ill-fitting suit hung off his frame like a borrowed costume. He was trembling so violently that the heavy wooden table in front of him rattled against the floor. Mr. Gable had already backed away, physically distancing himself from the toxic fallout of his own client. Harrison sat back in his chair beside me, folding his hands over his stomach, completely satisfied with the absolute destruction we had just orchestrated. The judge leaned forward, clasping her hands together. The sheer weight of judicial authority in her voice commanded the absolute attention of every person in the room. Brandon, you stand before this federal court, not as a victim of circumstance, but as the architect of your own spectacular demise. The judge began, her words striking like physical blows. You engaged in a systematic, premeditated campaign of financial terror against the very woman you asked to marry. You stole her secure federal identity. You burdened her name with massive fraudulent debt to cover the tracks of your mother's illegal activities. And when you felt cornered, you resorted to corporate extortion and unleashed a devastating cyber attack that crippled an entire financial institution. Brandon let out a quiet, pathetic whimper, his head dropping toward his chest. You have shown absolutely zero remorse, the judge continued mercilessly. You have only shown regret that you were caught by someone significantly smarter than you. You viewed the plaintiff not as a human being, but as a financial target. Your sheer arrogance led you to believe you could manipulate the federal banking system and the corporate sector without consequence. Today, the reality of your actions catches up with you. The room grew perfectly still. This was the moment. Therefore, the judge announced, her voice echoing like thunder across the mahogany walls, on the charges of aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and corporate sabotage, I sentence you to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. This sentence is to be served consecutively, without the possibility of parole. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to the corporate entity you destroyed, which guarantees your wages will be garnished for the rest of your natural life. This court is adjourned. The sharp crack of the gavel sealed his fate. 7 years, a mandatory federal sentence, no early release for good behavior, no comfortable minimum security resort. He was going to a concrete cell for nearly a decade. Brandon let out a strangled, breathless sob. His knees gave out completely, but the two massive federal marshals hauled him up by his armpits. They turned him around to face the center aisle. The walk of shame had officially begun. They dragged him away from the defense table. His luxury leather shoes scraped heavily against the polished marble floor. His face was a messy, pathetic portrait of snot and tears. The charismatic regional sales director who had tried to gaslight me in the foyer of my own home was entirely gone. He was replaced by a broken, terrified criminal realizing his life was officially over. As the marshals pulled him down the aisle, their path took them directly past the plaintiff table where I was sitting. I did not look away. I maintained absolute, terrifying eye contact. Brandon suddenly dug his heels into the ground, fighting against the grip of the officers just enough to stall his forward momentum. He looked at me with wide, bloodshot eyes, his chest heaving with desperate, ragged breaths. "Allison, please." Brandon begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine that echoed through the emptying courtroom. "I only did it to protect my mother. I truly love you." The marshals yanked his arms, preparing to force him forward. "Wait," I said quietly. The command was soft, but it carried an undeniable authority. The marshals paused for a fraction of a second, granting me the floor. I stood up slowly from my leather chair. I looked down at my tailored charcoal suit and calmly smoothed out the wrinkles on the front of my vest. I met his desperate, crying eyes with a stare colder than a Chicago winter. I was the black sheep of his family's narrative, the woman they thought they could easily manipulate and discard. But I was the one holding the keys to his cage. "You do not love me," I stated, enunciating every single word so it would echo in his mind for the next 7 years. You love the ATM with my name on it. Brandon sobbed louder, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks, but I did not offer a single ounce of pity. A piece of advice. Before you go to prison, Brandon, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal quiet register. Next time you want to steal, do not pick a woman whose literal job is throwing greedy men in suits into a concrete cell. I nodded to the federal marshals. Take the trash out. The officers jerked Brandon forward without another moment of hesitation. He wailed, crying out my name, but the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open and swallowed him whole. The doors slammed shut with a heavy final thud. The echo faded into absolute silence. The courtroom was empty of parasites. I picked up my leather briefcase, turned to Harrison, and offered a genuine smile. The financial predator had been eradicated, and my empire was safer than ever. The swift and brutal machinery of the federal justice system does not care about arrogance. Once the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung shut, the illusion of their superiority was entirely shattered. The rapid transition from a luxury lifestyle to absolute destitution hit Brandon, Vanessa, and Brenda with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. There was no grace period. There was no comfortable transition. There was only the harsh, unforgiving concrete of their new realities. Brandon was processed into a medium-security federal penitentiary located 500 miles away from the affluent Chicago suburbs he once prowled. The man who used to spend hours perfectly styling his hair and agonizing over the exact break of his tailored trousers was completely stripped of his identity. He traded his designer wardrobe for a scratchy, stiff khaki uniform that hung awkwardly off his rapidly diminishing frame. The luxury watches he used to flash at corporate board meetings were replaced by the cold steel of standard-issue handcuffs during transport. His days of ordering imported steaks and premium craft beers were reduced to standing in a sterile cafeteria line waiting for a tray of tasteless, mass-produced prison food. He was assigned a job in the facility laundry room, earning exactly 12 cents an hour. It was a profound poetic justice. The slick regional sales director who thought he could steal millions was now scrubbing the stained uniforms of other inmates just to afford a cheap bar of soap from the commissary. But the physical degradation of prison life was nothing compared to his psychological torment. Brandon was acutely aware of the massive corporate restitution waiting for him on the outside. Even if he survived his 7-year sentence, he would emerge as an unemployable felon, burdened by a $25 million judgment. Every single paycheck he might ever earn in the future would be instantly garnished. His financial ruin was permanent and inescapable. He spent his long, sleepless nights staring at the ceiling of his cramped cell, realizing he had traded a comfortable, wealthy future for absolute annihilation simply because he could not control his own greed. Vanessa experienced an equally catastrophic fall from grace. She was transferred to a women's correctional facility across the country. The woman who had treated her social media followers as a personal army was completely severed from the digital world. Stripped of her smartphone, her filters, and her fabricated victim narratives, she was rendered entirely invisible. She was no longer a tragically misunderstood sister fighting a wealthy tyrant. She was just another federal inmate assigned an identification number. The loss of her son to Terrence completely broke whatever fragile sanity Vanessa had left. But instead of looking inward and feeling remorse for her actions, she directed her venom outward. The bond between Brandon and Vanessa, once united by their shared parasitic nature, violently imploded. They turned on each other like starving wolves locked in a cage. During the rare, highly restricted phone calls they were allowed to make to their mother, they spent every single minute screaming accusations. Vanessa blamed Brandon for bringing the destructive ransomware into the equation, cursing his monumental stupidity for destroying their lives. Brandon viciously fired back, blaming Vanessa for her sheer arrogance in targeting a federal honeypot account and bringing the FBI directly to their doorstep. There was no loyalty among these thieves. They ruthlessly tore each other apart, their relationship dissolving into a toxic pool of hatred and resentment. While her children rotted in federal cells, Brenda faced a punishment that was arguably worse than a prison sentence. Due to her failing health and advanced age, her defense attorney had managed to secure a highly restrictive plea deal that kept her out of a penitentiary, but it left her utterly destitute. Stripped of her stolen federal pension, her state benefits, and her luxury condominium, Brenda was dumped into the absolute bottom tier of society. She was relocated to a dilapidated low-income housing complex on the far-forgotten outskirts of the city. The woman who had boldly demanded my king-size orthopedic mattress now slept on a sagging, heavily stained futon she found at a local charity dump. Her custom walk-in closets were replaced by a single broken plastic dresser with missing handles. The walls of her cramped, dimly lit apartment were coated in peeling paint and smelled permanently of damp mildew and stale cigarette smoke. She had zero disposable income. Every single dollar she managed to scrape together was closely monitored by a strict federal probation officer, ensuring she paid her mandatory restitution to the government. The total lack of funds meant her severe gambling addiction went entirely unmedicated and unsatisfied. The physical withdrawal from the bright lights and ringing bells of the casino floor left her shaking, irritable, and profoundly bitter. She spent her days sitting in a frayed armchair staring blankly at the cracked plaster on the ceiling, consumed by the memory of the wealth she had briefly touched and instantly lost. Desperation stripped away the last remaining shreds of her pride. Brenda spent her gloomy afternoons clutching a cheap prepaid mobile phone, scrolling through an outdated contact list. She dialed every cousin, every aunt, and every distant relative she could possibly remember. She spun elaborate, weeping lies about her failing health and her cruel, ungrateful children, begging for a wire transfer or a quick cash loan just to buy groceries. But the truth regarding her massive federal fraud and her despicable treatment of me had spread through their extended family network like wildfire. Nobody wanted to be associated with a convicted parasitic grifter. Her desperate phone calls were met with unified, icy rejection. Relatives would simply hang up the moment they recognized her pathetic, whining voice. Others did not even bother to answer, sending her directly to voicemail. Eventually, she began hearing the harsh, automated tones indicating that her number had been permanently blocked by the very people she used to boast to. Brenda was completely isolated, a social pariah living in squalor, entirely forgotten by the world she had tried to manipulate. The family that had arrogantly attempted to conquer my empire had thoroughly destroyed themselves from the inside out. They were crushed by the overwhelming weight of their own monumental greed, left with absolutely nothing but the miserable, haunting company of their own failures. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Chicago was bathed in the warm, golden glow of cascading crystal chandeliers. The sheer opulence of the evening was a stark, beautiful contrast to the chaotic, trash-filled driveway I had left behind 12 months ago. Tonight was the annual gala celebrating the unprecedented expansion of my financial forensics firm. We had not just survived the attempted sabotage by a mediocre regional sales director and his parasitic family. We had weaponized that entire encounter, turning the spectacular destruction of his ransomware attack into the ultimate marketing campaign for our impenetrable security protocols. In the span of 365 days, my company had completely transformed. We tripled our operational capacity, leasing 3 additional floors in our glass and steel high-rise to accommodate the massive influx of new corporate contracts. I aggressively recruited top-tier talent from across the country, hiring former federal investigators, elite cybersecurity, architects, and ruthless corporate litigators. My firm was no longer just a highly respected auditing agency in the Midwest. We had become the absolute terror of Wall Street. Corrupt hedge fund managers, embezzling chief executive officers, and offshore money launderers now whispered my name with genuine paralyzing fear. They knew that if my team was hired to audit their ledgers, there was no bribe large enough and no digital firewall strong enough to keep their secrets buried. Just last month, we had orchestrated the total financial dismantling of a multi-billion-dollar investment group in New York. The executives thought they could hide their phantom assets in decentralized cryptocurrency wallets and complex shell corporations. It took my newly expanded cyber division exactly 4 days to map their entire illicit network, freeze their shadow accounts, and hand a perfectly wrapped evidence dossier to the Securities and Exchange Commission. That single operation resulted in a dozen federal indictments and solidified our reputation as the apex predators of the financial sector. Tonight was a celebration of that precise, unforgiving excellence. I walked through the crowded ballroom holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne. I wore a custom-tailored midnight blue evening gown that swept elegantly across the polished marble floor. Every step I took commanded absolute respect. High-profile clients, bank presidents, and corporate board members parted like the Red Sea as I approached, eager to shake my hand and express their profound gratitude for saving their shareholders from financial ruin. I smiled graciously, accepting their praises with the cool, effortless confidence of a woman who completely owned her reality. Harrison stood near the grand staircase, swirling a glass of aged scotch. He wore his signature sharp tuxedo, observing the room with the proud, calculating gaze of a legal warlord. When he caught my eye, he raised his glass in a silent, respectful toast. We had fought in the trenches together, navigating the vile, desperate attacks of a parasitic family, and emerged completely victorious. He knew better than anyone else in this room exactly what it took to build this fortress. I nodded back to him, acknowledging the unbreakable bond forged in the fires of absolute corporate warfare. A soft chime echoed through the ballroom sound system, signaling the main event of the evening. The dull roar of elite networking instantly quieted down. Hundreds of powerful, influential guests turned their attention toward the elevated stage at the front of the room. I handed my champagne flute to a passing server, smoothed the fabric of my gown, and walked confidently up the illuminated steps. I stepped behind the sleek acrylic podium and adjusted the microphone. The room was so perfectly silent you could hear a pin drop. I looked out over the sea of expectant faces. These were the titans of industry, the people who controlled billions of dollars in global assets, and they were all waiting quietly for me to speak. I did not need notes. I did not need a teleprompter. The words came from a place of absolute hard-earned truth. Good evening. I began, my voice projecting clearly and powerfully across the vast ballroom. 1 year ago, I stood at a personal and professional crossroads. I was presented with a very specific, highly aggressive threat to everything I had built. A group of individuals attempted to infiltrate my home, compromise my business, and strip me of my assets using the disguise of familial trust. They assumed that my dedication to my work made me blind to my immediate surroundings. They believed that empathy and legal obligation would force me to surrender my empire to their sheer entitlement. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the front row of corporate executives. They were entirely captivated. In the world of finance, we are taught to assess risk based on market volatility, inflation rates, and geopolitical shifts. I continued, my tone sharp and resonant. But the greatest threat to any empire is never external market pressure. The greatest threat is the parasite that manages to bypass your security protocols by pretending to be an asset. In business and in life, the most dangerous liabilities are the ones wearing a friendly smile, sitting at your dinner table, demanding access to your hard-earned capital, while contributing absolutely nothing of value. My voice grew stronger, filling every corner of the room with absolute conviction. We did not triple the size of this firm by being polite. We did not become the premier forensic auditing agency in the country by giving second chances to thieves. We built this powerhouse by ruthlessly identifying the rot and cutting it out without a single ounce of hesitation. We built this by refusing to be victims. We proved that when you stop negotiating with parasites and start aggressively defending your boundaries, the potential for growth is absolutely limitless. The crowd erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. The applause was deafening, a massive wave of validation from the most powerful people in the city. I stood at the podium, letting the sound wash over me. I had taken the worst, most humiliating betrayal of my life and forged it into an indestructible armor of corporate dominance. But I knew I did not build this massive, newly expanded empire entirely by myself. I raised my hand, signaling for the applause to quiet down, so I could deliver the final, most important introduction of the night. It was time to bring my greatest ally into the spotlight. I raised my hand, and the thunderous applause sweeping across the grand ballroom instantly quieted to a respectful hush. I looked at the sea of elite corporate executives, federal investigators, and financial titans, knowing that none of this expansion would have been possible without the man standing near the edge of the stage. Building an empire requires vision, but protecting it requires an unbreakable, ruthless loyalty. I leaned into the microphone, my voice echoing with profound, genuine respect. "I want to introduce you to the architect of our newly expanded financial fortress," I announced, my gaze locking onto him. When I needed to dismantle a highly organized syndicate of domestic fraud, I did not call the police first. I called a man whose brilliance with a ledger is matched only by his absolute, unwavering integrity. He is the reason our firm is currently terrifying the most corrupt boardrooms on Wall Street. Please welcome my most trusted colleague, our Chief Financial Officer, Terrence. The ballroom erupted into a second wave of applause, even louder and more enthusiastic than the first. Terrence stepped out of the shadows and walked up the illuminated stairs to the stage. He did not look like the exhausted, financially abused husband who had called me in a panic at 2 a.m. a year ago. Tonight he looked like absolute royalty. He wore an immaculate, custom-tailored black tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His posture was commanding, radiating the quiet, lethal confidence of a man who held the financial keys to a multi-million-dollar agency. He stood beside me at the podium, looking out at the crowd of powerful billionaires and banking executives who now actively sought his counsel. They hung on his every word, fully aware that his forensic accounting skills were completely unparalleled. I stepped back, granting him the center stage he had so rightfully earned. Terrence adjusted the microphone, offering a sharp, charismatic smile that instantly charmed the entire room. "Thank you, Allison." Terrence began, his deep, resonant voice filling the grand space. "A year ago, I learned a very harsh lesson about investments. I learned that you can pour all of your capital, all of your time, and all of your trust into a partnership, only to discover that the other party is actively siphoning your resources to fund their own toxic liabilities. In the financial sector, we call that a catastrophic bad debt. In personal life, we call it a tragedy. But the beauty of a balance sheet is that it never lies. Numbers do not care about manipulation. They do not care about fake tears or fabricated victim narratives. The numbers simply demand a reckoning." The audience chuckled appreciatively, completely captivated by his effortless command of the room. When you discover a liability that threatens to sink your entire operation, you do not negotiate with it. Terrence continued, his tone growing sharper and more resolute. You do not offer it a payment plan. You cut it off at the source, you freeze the accounts, and you permanently restructure your enterprise. That is exactly what Allison and I did. We extracted the liabilities that were trying to destroy us, and we reinvested our energy into a partnership built on actual, verifiable merit. We built a family here not based on the random chance of bloodlines or empty legal contracts, but based on competence, honesty, and a shared dedication to absolute excellence. He turned his head and looked directly at me. His eyes conveyed a deep platonic love and a profound mutual respect that no parasite could ever comprehend. We had survived the same nightmare, fought in the same trenches, and emerged as kings of our own making. To Allison, Terrence said, raising his crystal flute of champagne high into the air. "A visionary leader, a ruthless protector, and the truest family I have ever known. May our ledgers always remain perfectly balanced, and may our enemies always remain utterly bankrupt." I stepped forward, raising my own glass to meet his. The sharp, clear chime of our crystal flutes, clinking together, echoed through the microphone, a perfect musical note of absolute victory. To the Empire, I replied, maintaining steady eye contact with the best chief financial officer in the country. The ballroom exploded into cheers. Glasses were raised across the room, celebrating the unstoppable alliance we had forged. The string quartet in the corner of the room immediately launched into a lively, triumphant symphony. The gala was in full swing, a dazzling display of wealth, power, and untouchable success. The people who had tried to steal this from us were currently sitting in concrete cells or rotting in dilapidated public housing, completely erased from our reality. I took a slow sip of my vintage champagne, letting the cold, crisp taste settle on my tongue. I looked at the glittering chandeliers, the smiling faces of my elite staff, and the vibrant, thriving chosen family I had surrounded myself with. I handed my glass to Terence, gave him a knowing smile, and slowly stepped down from the illuminated stage. The lively chatter of the ballroom began to fade into a muffled, distant hum as I walked confidently across the polished marble floor. I moved away from the crowd, stepping into the quiet, dimly lit corridor of the Grand Hotel. I stopped and turned, looking directly forward, locking my eyes straight into the camera lens, completely shattering the fourth wall. Marriage can be a graveyard if you blindly invite parasites into your home, I stated, my voice smooth, cold, and dripping with absolute certainty. You can spend your entire life building a sanctuary only to have it ripped apart by people who disguise their sheer greed as familial love. I took a slow, deliberate step closer to the lens, my expression hardening into a look of predatory perfection. But fortunately, the sheer arrogance of my near mother-in-law gave me a magnificent blessing. She was so blinded by her own entitlement that she cleared the exact path I needed to throw her entire family straight into the trash. She thought I would roll over. She thought I would be a good, quiet, accommodating bride. Instead, she handed me the very matches I used to burn their fraudulent empire to the ground. I smoothed the lapel of my tailored midnight blue gown, a sharp, knowing smirk playing on my lips. So ladies, listen to me very carefully. Buy your own houses. Guard your wallets tightly. Never merge your assets with a man who demands your submission disguised as a compromise. And above all else, do not ever be afraid to become a cold-blooded bitch when it is absolutely necessary. The greatest lesson from this ordeal is that true security comes from absolute financial independence and unwavering boundaries. Society often pressures women to compromise their hard-earned success for the sake of love or familial harmony. However, sharing a life with someone does not give anyone the right to exploit your resources. When people show you their true colors through entitlement and disrespect, you must believe them immediately. Never ignore red flags just to keep the peace. True family is built on mutual respect and integrity, not financial manipulation. Always protect your peace and your assets fiercely. If this story empowered you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own experiences with setting firm boundaries in the comments below.